It is 3 minutes after 10. A very good morning to you. Do you watch QI ever? It's a good show. It's one of those shows that I find I don't catch it as often as I should do, but whenever I do stumble across it, because I am very old and I still watch television in a linear fashion, I'm always struck by how good it is. I particularly love Alan Davis on it. And when Alan Davis says something, so they're all talking very intelligently about something and amusingly, and then Alan Davis says something that he thinks is one or the other. And it's already been programmed into the script, as it were, that he's wrong, and a sort of alarm goes off when that word is mentioned. I'm going to do that today. There's a phrase that if we hear it, Keith, are you paying attention? This is important. If you hear the phrase, if I hear the phrase, I will trigger Keith, and that alarm will go off. We're going to be talking, to give you some clues, we're going to be talking about planning, house building, NIMBYism, all of the above. And there is a phrase in this conversation that if someone utters it, and if no one has uttered it by 11 o'clock, I may surreptitiously slip it into proceedings myself just to make sure that Keith is paying attention. I wonder if you've already worked out what that phrase is. Not scripted. I don't mean into the script. I mean, if you're working in TV or radio, sometimes you call the running order the script. So it's like they've got words that are programmed into the whatever you call it. That when Alan Davis says that word, then it goes off in the background, and we're going to emulate that a little bit today. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. Would you like a little insight into how professional I am? Has anybody noticed what I've done wrong so far this morning? Eleanor, any ideas what I've done wrong so far this morning? Can you tell, just having a look at me now? Yeah. So all of my notes and newspapers are just out of my reach in the middle of the studio at the moment. And were I to stand up now and get them, then you would have to enjoy a few seconds of silence as I made my way around the table. And it is like working with a bunch of amateurs, but where I lead, everybody follows. And I need my notes today because we're going to begin. Thank you. We're going to begin with a story that at first glance may seem a little dry. Front page of the newspaper, Reeves ready for war over the UK's green belt as she vows to take on NIMBYs. Now, you know, I have an enduring fascination with things that feel like enormous changes before they happen. And then after they've happened, you can't quite believe what all the fuss was about. We should make a list, shouldn't we? Because I usually reach for something like the smoking ban or seatbelts in cars. What were we talking about yesterday? That I just wondered whether it gets filed under enormous change on the way, but after it's actually happened, everyone will wonder what the fuss was about. Mobile phones in schools, potentially. Hey, guess which school has set to ban smartphones from the premises as of next term? I mean, this isn't really a hook and tease. If I say it's the most famous school in the world, probably you'll get a bit of a clue as to which one it is. And in fact, one of its alumnus will probably feature on the programme a little later as well. Nick did a conversation this morning that sent my thought processes scurrying off in a slightly different direction. I'm wondering whether David Cameron, who steps back once again from public life today, having spent 11 minutes being Foreign Secretary, for which he's been rewarded with a seat in the House of Lords. It's a bit unfair. He'd have got it anyway. I think he's got away with it, hasn't he? I don't know what the history books of the future will read like, but I think for now, David Cameron has probably got away with being if not the chief architect of our national decline. And yet the list of people who would be ahead of him in the queue of blame is pretty long. Well, we'll get onto that a little later in the programme. No, not Hogwarts, George, but thank you for playing. I want to know what it's like when a shed load, I nearly said something completely inappropriate then, when a shed load of new houses are built within walking distance of your front door. All right? I recognise the necessity. Winston Churchill, you know, or the Tories, not just Churchill. I think it was between 51 and 64? I think they built 1.3 million houses between 51 and 64. I only know this because I was helping my daughter do her history revision during the A-level period, and so I reserve the right to have misremembered or to have got it slightly wrong. No, Javier, it's not Grange Hill, it's Eton, all right? There's a clue when I said I was talking about David Cameron, the most famous school in the country. It's not Hogwarts, and it's not Eton. Hogwarts doesn't even exist. Well, nor does Grange Hill. I don't know what it's like to have enormous construction on my doorstep. Not in the context of Greenbelt. Okay, so where I live in West London, they have undergone, I've mentioned this to you a bit lately, they've undergone huge redevelopment lately. They have thrown up magnificent new apartment blocks that have completely changed the face of the entire area, to the chagrin of some locals, and it's a chagrin with which I have some sympathy. But if you are talking about growth and development, then we need a sort of second era of massive house building. And when I was growing up, I lived in the countryside. I lived in Worcestershire, just outside Kidderminster. I lived smack in the middle of Kidderminster when I was very young, but we moved just outside Kidderminster. We had this madhouse, this really amazing house that, listen, it's probably not going to sound like an estate agent's brochure, this, but from my bedroom window, you could see the whole town. We were like halfway up a hill. There's a golf club at the top of the hill and a big old farmhouse halfway down the hill. And we had sort of half of the farmhouse, or a third of the farmhouse in the old stables or dairy area. But from the third floor, where my bedroom was, it was the only room on the third floor, you could see the whole town spread out in front of you. It was really, really beautiful, especially at night. And there's a word that you don't often hear in the context of Kidderminster, beautiful, or especially at night. And all that stood or sat between our house, like literally the bottom of my garden, the bottom of our garden, and the entirety of Kidderminster, all that sat between us was farmland. And periodically, there would be reports and attempts to build housing on the entirety of that land. So the urban sprawl of Kidderminster was at the bottom of a big old hill, and every now and then, panic would run through our tiny community of about 8 houses because somebody had heard that the farmer was trying again to flog the land to a developer who would then build new homes pretty much all the way up the hill or halfway up the hill. But either way, that great expanse of green or gold, depending on what time of year it was and what crops were in place, would be absolutely obliterated or occupied by new homes. And look, there's an indication of how important words are. Obliterated or occupied. Which one feels different in your mouth or in your mind? Obliterated. They've obliterated the Greenbelt. It's been occupied. They've built houses. They've inhabited. There you go. Obliterated or inhabited. We're inhabiting the Greenbelt. We're obliterating the Greenbelt. Same thing. Describing the same thing. 11 minutes after 10 is the time. And I also heard Rachel Reeves yesterday mention a railway station. I need to say the producer was adamant that I make this clear from the very start. It's not a day for the train nerds. All right, lads? I'm about to say something that might make the train nerds think, oh, excellent, James wants to hear from me again today. And you know that I love talking to you. You know that I do. On air and off air. There's nothing I enjoy more than a conversation about trains or indeed buses, except perhaps bridges. But today is not the day for the calls from the train nerds, but I'm about to go in on a train-based issue. So just hold your horses. Worcestershire Parkway Station it's possibly the maddest place I have ever been. I grew up down the road. I've only visited it relatively recently. One of my girls discovered it as a way to get back to London about an hour quicker than I've ever managed in all of the 40 years that I've been travelling between London and Kidderminster. So my sister dropped me off at Worcestershire Parkway Station, and it is an enormous station in the middle of bloody nowhere. I mean, literally in the middle of nowhere. So it's important because it's where 2 quite big train lines cross. The Cotswolds train line and a kind of east-west train line. And it therefore delivers all manner of connections. And don't phone me, train nerds. I said don't phone me, train nerds. All manner of connections and crossovers. And if I were looking around the area of England in which I grew up, and someone said, where would be a good place to build a new town? I would say Worcestershire Parkway. I mean, crikey, you could build a whole town there. It's already got extraordinary transport links. Even the roads are impressive because, obviously, altogether now, they lead to the station. So the roads are impressive because they lead to the station. But what was it? I don't think I've ever driven to a railway station before where there is no buildings anywhere. There's no houses. There's no homes on the routes, on the roads everywhere. So you could do it there. You could do it there. David in Bradford asks, is there a blue plaque outside your childhood home in Kidderminster yet, David? I believe you have to have been dead for at least 10 years. So all I can say is that I hope not. 13 minutes after 10 is the time. So I've got two conflicting, and oddly enough, on the farmland near my old house. So I was back there a month or so ago. I always like to go for a walk around that neck of the woods. Sorry, railway enthusiasts. Thank you, Paul, not train nerds. Railway enthusiasts. Not today, lads, not today. So I was back up on my old turf, and they are building a massive estate on a slightly different bit of farmland, which is about a mile and a half away from my old bedroom window. And it is causing all of the controversy and upset that you'd imagine. But I am of the view that if they do it right, then a year after people have moved in, all of the people that already lived in the area who were really cross and worried about the new development, I am of the view that they will have forgotten what they were cross about in the first place. But this is an overdose of optimism. So what I want you to tell me, first and foremost, I don't think we can do a phone-in on where you would put a new town. Or can we take some side order calls on where would you put a new town? I think I'm talking to you about Worcestershire Parkway. A huge majority of people listening to the programme haven't got the first idea what I'm talking about. Well, I tell a lie. Richard does. I live in Droitwich, James. Worcestershire Parkway is a funny station. It's absolutely massive and nothing is there. You never see any cars in the car park. But that's because everyone... Oh, railway enthusiasts are going to be so cross with me now. That's because everyone's transferring trains and traversing the country in a new and efficient fashion. So you wouldn't drive there yet because you don't know no one lives nearby. But so that's why you build the town there. So it's a great idea. Should we make a short list of places where you could build new towns, or is that too geeky? So I've already alienated the railway enthusiasts. Now I'm going to alienate the urban planning enthusiasts. So what happened? This is the question I want you to answer. All right. What happened when they built a shed load of new homes near you? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I'm familiar with the threats to natural beauty and the ecosystem and the rest of it, but generally speaking, that's a question of social evolution, isn't it? If you build on one area of natural beauty, it doesn't limit your access to others. I know that sounds a little cynical, but we're going to have to build somewhere. If Winston Churchill can do it in 1951, then we can jolly well do it in 2024. So what is it like when thousands of new homes, or hundreds of new homes, but a significant number of new homes are built on your doorstep in the countryside? It's very different in cities and towns. I'm talking about on the edges of cities and towns, or indeed in more equally partitioned countryside. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I want this conversation to be fascinating. I like to feel I've done my bit, and now it's up to you to keep the standards up. 0345 6060 973. What is it like to actually have one of the towns and or estates? What was it like to be living in the countryside where Milton Keynes is now? Chiswick was a new town once, So, we don't look at Chiswick, if you're familiar with it. I'm drawing on the areas where I've lived and that I know. No one looks at Chiswick now and thinks, it all used to be green fields. Those were the days you used to be able to walk all the way through the Duke of Bedfordshire's estate down to the River Thames. Chiswick is been there for over 100 years, feels like part of the furniture. So it's not, I'm afraid, a no-brainer that development is bad, but it is a question worth answering, or at least worth asking, if it's really as bad as we kind of think it will be, if that is the area in which we live. So special prizes today to anyone who lived where Milton Keynes is now, before Milton Keynes was a thing. Do we know, was Milton Keynes built in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 50s? I'll check. So anyone who lived where Milton Keynes is now, what was that like? 0345 6060 973. And what is it like to have a shed load of houses built on your doorstep? I just want to know how it changed you, how it changed your environment, how it changed your lives. You see sometimes, don't you, anomalous buildings that obviously were occupied by people who refused to be part of the new development. There's a farm on the motorway that crosses the Pennines. I think the motorway goes smack through the middle of the farms. Obviously, someone just said, "No, I'm not selling up. No, I've been here 200 years." That might be relevant to the conversation, but what I really want is just hopefully a measured reminder that not only does it need to be done, but it needs to be done in some places where the people already there won't want it done, and that they probably don't need to be quite as worried as they currently are. It's 10:18. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. I do love you. I really do. I should have known, shouldn't I? I mean, it's actually a little bit like that Jonathan Davis alarm. Have we found it yet? Have we got the Jonathan Davis alarm? I've already said the phrase that will be triggered if you say it. I said it inadvertently. We're having a conversation about Greenbelt, NIMBYism, housing, all the rest of it. But when I talked about that farmhouse that's cut in half by a motorway because the farmer didn't want to sell it, I was wrong. So it would have gone off in the background. It's precisely the sort of thing that I'm trying to describe badly. Apparently there's a geological fault. I don't know why I said that word like that. There's a geological fault. The environs or beneath the farmhouse, which meant they couldn't actually build the roads on it. Alan Davis, I've received that message, that explanation about the M62, for that is the motorway under discussion, from about 150 people this morning already. That's how much I love you. 21 minutes after 10 is the time. Simon is in Bury St Edmunds. Simon, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning, James. First-time caller. Good morning. I'm just, I was just to answer your question really about what do we see that happens when we have large numbers of housing. And I live in a village not far from Bury St Edmunds, and we have houses which are being, the local plan is being extended, and housing is going up. Normally in good consultation. What I witness is that, and it's going to sound terribly negative, but what I witness is just more potholes, more congestion.
Oh, my Lord, we've accidentally started a potholes phone in. I don't believe it. What a time to be alive. Go on. No, I hear you.
But there is the answer to this is to get anybody that wants to apply for planning permission for a group of houses, however small, however big. They need to have far more investment from these house builders
in the surrounding infrastructure, not just potholes, but sewers and schools and all the rest of it. Yeah, but working on the principle that they will do that. The disruption during the building process is different from the impact upon the community when the building is long completed. I also, and I really don't want to tempt any other calls on this subject or adjacent subjects, potholes are a problem everywhere now, not just where they're doing building. I live in what's effectively a cul-de-sac, and it's got more potholes than the moon, mate. It's unbelievable. I just haven't done any. If I was, you like that one, Simon? If I was Keir Starmer, I think if everyone filled in the potholes, how much more peaceful would all our existences be? So I don't think that's just because of the developments. But I'm glad.
I think it's, but James, seriously, it's just about infrastructure. It's about how. The bus services don't get any better. So, people are reliant. We've got 200 houses happening in a village near us. There's going to be at least 200 more cars commuting in and out because each house is going to have potentially 1.5, maybe 2 cars. You know what I mean?
Yes, of course I do. Well, this is why I like Worcestershire Parkway, because it's got great roads and no houses.
Can I move there?
Yeah, well, I don't know yet, mate. There's no buildings to live in. It's just, you could probably get a shakedown in the station. There's a nice piano there. Simon, thank you. A nice start. 24 minutes after 10 is the time. And that is crucial. I recognise that. But I don't want it to be anecdotal. And I don't want it to be something that's easily addressed. It's more, they're building 2,000 houses round the corner from my mum's. What will it be like 5 years after the building has been finished? Will everyone still be cross about it? And, of course, Milton Keynes, I think, only got the go-ahead in 1967, 5 years before I was born. And now, I don't presume that there's people wandering around Buckinghamshire dreaming of the good old days before Milton Keynes existed. Maybe there are, and if there are, you know what to do. Nigel's in Wallingford. Nigel, what would you like to say?
How are you, James?
Very well.
Long time no speak. James, I live and work in the countryside. We live in South Oxfordshire, and I think it's fair to say we're getting our fair share of building going on the last 10, 15 years.
Well, you're
There's
getting
not many
more.
positives, to be honest.
You're
There's not
getting
many
more.
positives. We get more and more building.
Around
We
the
get much
golden
more
triangle that is formed between the university cities of Oxford, Cambridge and London. That's been identified already. The previous government was talking up the likelihood of significant development within that area. I'd be very surprised, writes one expert, if the current government doesn't continue with that overall strategy. Does this strike terror into your NIMBY heart?
Yeah, it does. I'll tell you why. My wife's commute is becoming unsustainable. It's gone up from 50 minutes, 55 minutes to about an hour and 20 minutes. There's more congestion. I mean, just to get my kids to the local primary school. By the way, we could not get any three of our catchment schools for our primary school. So it's 15, 20 minutes there, 20 minutes back. The other thing is, James, is, look, we're fundamentally... I live and work in a rural area. We want it to remain rural. We want to see the green belt protected. We don't want this.
So where would you put the houses?
James,
James,
with great respect, I'll make one point to you, James.
No, of course you can, mate. It's all good. It's all friendly. It's all friendly. I know feelings run high. I'm not living there, so I'm not here to tease you or to sting you.
No. Most rural people are going like, as I know, the reason probably people Brexited 8 years ago was because of the perceived immigration and the effect of 700,000 people coming in. They've got to live somewhere, and they've got to build everywhere. And to be honest, there's two problems. For example, the guy that works for me, he's a brilliant guy. He's 30 years old. He's not able to live in his village. And what we need
that's a reason to build more houses.
Right, but
it's the biggest reason of all, isn't it?
We're seeing more and more houses being built, James. I know quite a lot about estates and stuff. The amount of houses that have been sold.
I know quite a lot about how to provide a house for someone who hasn't got one.
Right, so you provide houses
you build one.
to local need, owner-occupier, not buy-to-let investors, not foreign buyers.
Yeah, but you're still building. You've still got all the problems you're describing.
Yeah. And you could do it in a modest way. And you
it can't be modest. I mean, what would you have said if I had said to you in 1951, Winston Churchill's new government is committing to building 1.3 million new houses?
Yeah, but hang on, James. That was 1951, 1960.
Yeah.
We're getting 600,000 people coming in a year. They've got to go somewhere.
Not every year. I mean, that unfortunately, putting the champions of Brexit in charge of the country turned out to be a really stupid thing to do. If only someone had warned you that was likely to happen. But the necessity. Hang on. The necessity. No, hang on. You've said your bit. The necessity of the movement of labour is going to get bigger as a consequence of our national demographics, people living longer and getting sicker, and having fewer children. We are going to need to bring in more people to work, to keep the economy afloat, to keep the country moving, not least because an awful lot of people who no longer work will still be living in, you can fill in the gaps now, Nigel, will still be living in...
James.
No, go on.
James.
No, you have to say the word. They'll still be living in...
Well, they're still going to live in houses.
They'll still be living in houses, but they won't be working, and they might be needing care, and that is why we need to bring in more labour. And they will also need to live in...
James, we got...
No, they will also need to live in... What will they need to live in?
Well, James...
No, hang on. What will they need to live in?
James, we've got to cut the cloth.
You've got to say houses, haven't you, Nigel? We've got an ageing, sick population.
James,
we've got a necessity for immigration. And where are all the new workers going to live? In...
James, listen to me.
No, they're not going to live in James. They're going to live in houses. And so are the people who aren't working anymore. And that is why, if you want to have a conversation about immigration on this programme, as opposed to on programmes where knee-jerk reactions and unevidenced rhetoric remain popular, you're going to have to understand the demographic challenges that the country faces. Luckily, there's a programme you can listen to where they get explained on a regular basis. It's coming up to 10:30. A lot of you thought that would set the alarm off. A lot of you thought that I was waiting to hear the word immigration in the context of predictable and often ill-informed commentary regarding house building and property. It's not immigration. It's not immigration. Although, as Hillary says, there's always a Nigel. It's coming up to 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It's 10:32. We need a bingo card. This is a conversation about house building. We've already had Brexit, potholes, immigration and Winston Churchill, although I was responsible for Winston Churchill. It's sort of topics where the words or phrases likely to pop up, whatever the topic is. And I don't think potholes would necessarily be on the top of the list. The other question, of course, that people who think that the necessity of building new homes for people to live in is a sign that immigration is a bad thing or out of control. Where are your children and grandchildren going to live when they no longer live with you? So you are currently a family with 2 or 3 generations, and soon you will be in 2 or 3 homes instead of 1. And yet the older generation, the people who would once have been dying in their 60s and 70s, are now measurably more likely to be living into their 80s and 90s. And guess where they live? In houses. So, I know it's tempting for the hard of thinking to reach for immigration every time they're presented with complicated issues, but it is, you'd have hoped people had learnt by now, it's unhelpful. 10:33 is the time. But nobody wants it where they are. Nobody, unless you're the property developer or unless you've got a business that would benefit from huge numbers of new customers, or unless you're somewhere where I am, where they're developing on rundown industrial land, riverside estate that has had no real purpose since the dockyards shut effectively, and they're building a swanky new development there. It's probably going to put money on the homes of everybody that already lives in the town. So you can see an attraction for that. But these examples will be very, very rare. The big examples will be the new towns and indeed the big new estates on the fringes of towns that already exist. Peter points out, bringing some of our previous callers' points back into relief, we haven't got the staff, we haven't got the brickies or the electricians or the carpenters. We told them all to clear off back to where they came from, and they did. 10:34 is the time. Lee is in Newport Pagnell, just outside, wait for it, Milton Keynes. Lee, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. You're right. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous.
It's only me, mate. It's only me. Don't forget, though, that there is the danger of an alarm going off in the background if you say the phrase that I had expected to appear by now but hasn't. Carry on.
No. Basically what it is, as I said, I live in Newport Pagnell, which is just outside Milton Keynes. They've just started developing on some farmland outside of Newport Pagnell. And what they did, they closed one of the main roads going to Newport Pagnell that takes you out to junction 14 of the M1. Everyone will probably know Newport Pagnell.
For the duration of the building work or forever?
Yeah. So for 12 months. So right. Everyone was like, oh my God, social media for all the local groups kicking off. Yeah. How can they chose it for 12 months and all this? And then
that is a pain that is a pain in the butt, isn't it? There's no getting away from it.
Yeah, and that was kind of it. But then after that, there's another road which basically everyone uses to get down to Junction 14.
Yeah. And don't say Junction 14 again. Don't say Junction 14 again. I've got the picture. All right. Don't get less specifics.
Okay,
Carry on.
I won't. And they decided to close that road as well. So, but luckily, everyone was like, you can't close the 2 main roads going out of Newport Pagnell. Because you're basically...
Isn't that an album by the Manic Street Preachers?
Well, Newport Pagnell Famous was mentioned in a Smith song.
That was it. But these aren't reasons not to build. These are temporary inconveniences caused by bad planning, which is now, that's Rachel Reeves' job, isn't it, to make sure, and Angela Rayner's job.
Exactly. I'm not complaining about it because literally after they kept the road open, it died down. And to be fair, Ben Everett, the local Tory MP, ran his campaign on don't let Labour come in and build 63,000 new homes. And he lost. He lost to the local Labour candidate. So it basically shows you what Milton Keynes.
Well, also that makes him part of the anti-growth coalition, doesn't it? Because we can't have growth for the reasons that I can tell. I'm going to spend the next few years explaining. We can't have growth without creating more housing for the growing workforce. Some of which will be imported, and some of which will be at school at the moment.
That's it. So I think there was some inconvenience at the start off, a lot of complaints, but I think it's the noise has settled down now. People are able to get in and out of Newport Pagnell, so everybody's happy. But obviously, it's a mild inconvenience. And
exactly. And what you want politicians to do is put some pressure upon the building companies to spend money that they don't have to spend on things that they should be spending it on. And the best way of doing that is making it a situation where they do have to spend it. And things like that, proper forward thinking on road infrastructure and getting people in to and from work, and the temporary inconvenience of an extended commute. These are, in the great scheme of things, small prices to pay for economic growth and economic health. But if it's you that's been asked to pay them and you can't really see the benefits, then it's the job of government and of course media to explain the reality and explain the facts. But as Lee reminds us, unintentionally, they could muff it all up, couldn't they? They could. I mean, some of the stories you hear about new build houses at the moment are just heartbreaking. So there's absolutely no guarantees that any of this will work, but they've got to try. Otherwise, we're all doomed. Charles is in Mould. Charles, what would you like to say?
Good morning. Well, I think I fit into your criteria because I was Mr. Angry, Mr. Cross.
Excellent.
But I just wonder why I was Mr. Cross.
Yes.
A few years later.
Fantastic.
So the background is, when we moved into our house about 20 years ago, semi-rural area, we had a lovely open aspect to the back with horses grazing, all the rest of it. And lo and behold, a few years ago, planning application went in. I tried everything. I got cross hot under the collar, several hundred houses.
Petition? Did you start a petition?
I didn't have a petition, but I wrote in.
Amateur.
I'm sorry about it. But I wrote in about light pollution, about noise, about traffic, about drainage.
Yes.
About great crested newts even.
Oh, yes.
And so I pulled everything. But in any case, it went ahead. And I was worried about, what would it be like having houses 10 metres away from the back border and all the rest of it. But I honestly can't remember now what it was like before. I can vaguely remember it was nice, but sure. I honestly can't remember. We're just used to it. There's additional noise, not much. There's additional traffic, not much, and we're just used to it. And the only reason I was ringing it is because I thought, well, I invested so much time being cross and angry, and then I realised that, well, I've got kids and grandkids. They need somewhere to live, and one of them has bought a house on a new estate.
Oh, how fantastic! That really is symmetrical, then, isn't it?
And that's it, really. And I'm just thinking, to hell with it. I'm fully supportive of the government trying to build new houses, and if they have to build new houses near to people's back gardens, well, that's tough. That's just tough. It's just life.
They're going to have to be near something.
And you get used to it. And
so
you get used to it.
Well, you do get used to it, and you still derive pleasure from elements of your life that you derived pleasure from before. I don't think anyone would criticise you for the original position, and I would certainly be the first to recognise that it's hard to recognise that you were wrong about things. But that's why we did the introduction that we did, Charles, in the hope that people would be sitting there going, flipping heck, I didn't realise he's talking about me. Do you remember? I was livid. Absolutely spitting nails about it. And I've not even really given it a moment's thought for the last 2 or 3 years. Oh, and my grandchild's just bought a home on the new estate that wouldn't even have existed were it not for the existence of the new estate. 1040 is the time. Listen, this is not going to be a panacea. It's one of my favourite words, that. This is not going to be a panacea. And there will be examples. HS2 had some wonderful examples, or by wonderful, I mean very strong examples of what felt like rather epic unfairness. It feels even more unfair now that they've cancelled half of it. But you would genuinely have threats to beauty spots. But part of the reason HS2 ended up being so prohibitively expensive was because they decided to tunnel everywhere to keep the local communities quiet instead of just chucking the trains across the actual land like they would have done in most normal countries. Paul in Coulson says, you might buy a house that has a nice view, but you don't own the view. Ash says, what a bloody breath of fresh air that Charles fellow is. This is my reason I'm on earth, is to help people stop being Mr. Angry, to help people stop being Mr. Cross. Sometimes you have to turn up the anger levels before you can start the process of rehabilitation. I fully accept that is my role on some mornings, but there it is. Charles is there to say you can choose how angry you're going to get about this, but it should at least be informed by a proper understanding of what the road ahead might look like, and that's what we're trying to work out today. Amar is in Kirklees. Amar, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. First, I want to to thank you. I love listening to your show.
Thank you.
I think it is very educational for people and very broad-minded. We need more Jameses to do shows like yours.
That's very kind. Is there a big butt coming, Amar?
No, there's no buts coming from me.
I'm very
always
glad
positive.
to hear it. You're very kind. Carry on. What made you pick up the phone today?
Well, it was an interesting conversation. I'm actually making my way over to the cabinet meeting in Kirklees. I am an elected councillor over here.
Okay.
And we've got a development site of 5,000 homes going up. But out of them 5,000, only 500 will belong to the local government. And the housing crisis in Britain is massive. I mean, over in Kirklees, we have over 36,000 people on the housing waiting list.
Crikey.
And we've only got properties over like 150. There's people in hotels that are in temporary accommodation for up to 6 months or longer. And I'm happy that we have got a Labour government finally. And that will be, one of their commitments was the green belt will be turning into brown belt so local authorities could develop.
It's still the decisions. I think will still be devolved to councils, won't they? They'll still be devolved to local authorities, but you will have more freedom to do things that may be locally and hopefully temporarily unpopular than you currently do.
Exactly. Like I was saying, the 5,000 homes, when the application went in, that we had a massive uproar from the local community.
Right.
And the core issues that they had was these 5,000 homes that are being built, 5,000 potential families coming in, the NHS strain already in Dewsbury Hospital, local schools, what are you going to do? So you've got to look at the impact that you're going to have on other residents living in these areas. I mean, 5,000 new homes is brilliant, but 5,000 new families, where are they going to go?
Yeah, but would they? But then doesn't the? I've never thought of it this way around before. But doesn't the waiting list kick in then? So don't you say no? They're already here. They're already using all the amenities. They're just living in B&Bs and substandard accommodation. But that's only going to be, if people are looking for social housing, that's only going to be 10% of the new 5,000 homes that are going to...
That's a conservative way of doing it, James.
Right. What, conservative with a small c or a big C? Be careful. What? How dare you? That's an outrageous slur. But they are. I mean, some people are going to move in. Some people are already going to be there. So it is swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, so with this new development, we got committed a new school there.
There you go.
A new GPs.
Yeah.
And but still the residents were happy, but obviously it was down to the planning committee, which I was part of, so we voted it through. So we've got another project that we passed last year as well for 3,000 additional homes. So that takes you up to 8,000 in Kirklees. We are still short of at least 22,000 homes in Kirklees to make people comfortable that they will be having a social housing. But the thing is, the local authority don't have money to have all the social housing. So out of them 8,000 homes that are getting built in Kirklees over the next 10 years, only 500 will belong to the local authority.
Yeah, that's a problem.
So it's great for the Labour Party to do all this, but then where is the money going to come to the local authority to do it?
How much of it would be? I mean,
brink of bankruptcy.
Is there a requirement for affordable housing, or as opposed to social housing as well, or is it just entirely 100% privately owned or 100% publicly owned?
I mean, affordable housing.
What does it mean? What does that phrase mean?
Exactly. I mean, look at the mortgage rates. My niece and nephew recently bought a joint property. It was a 5-bedroom they bought for £245,000, and their monthly return to the banks is £1,400.
Yeah, I mean, you're right to draw attention to the need for more social housing, and we will see how heavily or how highly that is prioritised by the Labour government, which, at first glance has simply recommitted to a 300,000 new homes a year pledge that was Conservative Party policy at the time of the last general election and remained so until I think Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. Amar, thank you. After the next junction, we'll cross live to Kyiv, where Oz Chatterjee is inside. Or was, I mean, he is at the hospital. He's been at the hospital that was bombed yesterday. He'd been inside it when it was operational. And in fact, it was his Twitter account that first drew my attention to the atrocity, the war crime committed yesterday by Russia, who, among other attacks upon Ukrainian territory, bombed a children's hospital. We'll catch up with what's going on there with Oz after this. 10:48 is the time. In Gaza and in Ukraine, you sometimes wonder whether you might have lost the capacity to be shocked. And it was the turn of Kyiv yesterday to reassure us or remind us, whatever the correct word is, that we have not lost that capacity. The Abbot Children's Hospital, Ukraine's biggest paediatrics facility, sustained major damage after being hit as part of a wave of Russian missile strikes against cities across Ukraine. Oz Kataji is in Kyiv. He's reported from the hospital when it was operational and was at the scene after the attack yesterday. I don't know where to start, Oz, so you decide.
Good morning, James. Firstly, I'd like to apologise to your listeners because every time I'm on your show, it's when something horrible's happened, and it's never nice to be the kind of bearer of bad news. But yeah, it is as you described it. I need to go further than that, though. The Ahmadiyat Children's Hospital, which is the equivalent of the Ukrainian Great Ormond Street. It's the biggest, largest children's hospital in the country. Whenever there are children from anywhere with really sick children, that's where they're taken. And now it's out of operation, which means that that's going to trickle down and mean that, kids that were being operated on or having cancer treatment there now need to go somewhere else for that treatment and not get the same level of specialized treatment they were getting at Ahmadiyat Children's Hospital. The other thing I'll say is that it goes further than that. They didn't just bomb a children's hospital yesterday. They bombed 3 hospitals yesterday, one in Dnipro and 2 in Kyiv. And the other one they bombed in Kyiv was a maternity hospital. They bombed a children's hospital and a maternity hospital in the same day. And then they deny it, as they always do, and start blaming, the Ukrainian anti-air defense systems, even though the video footage shows very clearly that it's a Kinzhal hypersonic missile. So these are the most advanced rockets that Russia has in its arsenal. They're very expensive. They're guided missiles. So these very expensive guided hypersonic missiles were fired from Russia to hit these targets. This was precision targeted strikes on a children's hospital and a maternity hospital. And I need to say, again, if you're shocked by this, I need to remind people what happened in 2016 in Syria, when the Assad regime, and in cooperation with Russia, were bombing, starving, and besieging Aleppo. And the world, the international community, did nothing for Aleppo. They were willing to let that bombardment, starvation, siege happen. The only thing that the international community pushed for, quite similar to what they've been pushing for in Gaza, is please can we get some aid in? Please can we organize a convoy? But because Russia's council is able to veto anything they want. So eventually, the Russians agreed to let one aid convoy into Aleppo. And I hope that some of your audience remember this in 2016. What did they do with that UN aid convoy? They bombed it. They bombed the convoy they had granted permission to enter into the town. Then they lied about it. In Ban Ki-moon's last speech, he condemned them. He condemned Russia for doing it. But this is what we knew was happening in 2016.
Crucial context, Oz. And if people had forgotten about it or weren't aware of it, that they are now. What were the scenes in Kyiv that you witnessed yesterday?
I mean, what is there to say? I'll say there were two types of scenes I saw yesterday. One, the horror of nurses, doctors drenched in blood, children, babies, being taken out of the hospital, bandaged, wrapped up, blood everywhere. The kinds of scenes that you never want to see. A woman bloodied being pulled out of the rubble. Then you saw something else, something that shows you that Kyiv will never be broken. You saw, I would say, thousands. I can't give you an exact number, but there were so many people that turned up at that hospital to create a chain link, to remove the rubble, to start bringing in supplies, water, food for people that needed it. There were just people from all over Kyiv turned up to get involved. This isn't a place where things like this happen and people try and move on with their lives. Everyone knows that they're in a war, and everyone knows what that means for them. and people turned up here to protect each other, to defend each other, to help each other.
And yet, once again, the contrast between the resolve within Ukrainian borders and without is stark. Zelensky calling once again for the West to do more, a stronger Western response. The Ukrainian defense minister also urging the country's allies to help quickly strengthen its air defences. Will these calls be ignored, do we think?
I mean, look, there's two things. One, they need air defences. It looks like they might get some more of those coming soon, hopefully. Looking forward to the NATO summit today to start seeing if there's going to be any action on that. There's a bigger thing that the Ukrainians are calling for. The Ukrainians aren't being bombed from places they don't know. They know exactly where these planes are taking off from, where their missiles are being shot from. And at the moment, the US is blocking them from being able to use US weapons on those airfields. Those airfields could be destroyed. Those planes, those jet bombers, they could be destroyed with the weapons that Ukraine currently has in its arsenal. What they need is the permission to do the job. And the alternative is watching children's hospitals and maternity hospitals get blown up day in, day out with impunity unless the Ukrainians are given the permission to blow up the airfields where these bombers are coming from. It's a really simple equation for Washington, and they haven't given that permission yet. And I think that's an unconscionable decision, personally.
Oz, thank you. You're right. We do only speak to you at times of epic tragedy. If you ever want to bring anything to our attention that is more uplifting, some of the work that's going on away from the front line, behind the scenes, then do just let us know, and we will absolutely make that happen. Oz Chatterjee speaking to you live from Kyiv, where the Ukrainian equivalent of the Great Ormond Street Hospital was bombed yesterday by Vladimir Putin's army as part of his illegal war in Ukraine. And some people don't like it, but I know that everybody decent does. It falls to me to remind you that politicians on the march in the West have been very explicit and vocal in their admiration for Vladimir Putin, whether you're talking about Marine Le Pen in France or Nigel Farage in this country, the man about whom they have such warm words to say, bombing children in Kyiv yesterday. It's 10:56. Back to domestic planning issues, back to housing, back to this curious tension. And once again, actually, the absolute importance of cool, objective evidence and analysis. Because if I say to you, do you want a new estate built on your doorstep? You almost certainly say no. Although Emma doesn't. Emma says, I do. We moved here just over 11 years ago, and it's the most racist place I've ever lived. It was a huge culture shock moving from Hounslow/Uxbridge to, quotes, lovely leafy Fleet. Oh my days. Thankfully, I see the area becoming slowly younger and more diverse, and so I need these new estates to dilute the utter vipers I now only really see on whingy local Facebook groups. So, Emma notwithstanding, most people don't want a new estate on their actual doorstep. And yet, when it happens, how bad is it really? 10:57 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm not going to put you in Idiot's Corner, but in the context of that conversation with Oz Chatterjee, we not only touched on, or didn't even touch on, we not only drew parallels with what is going in Gaza in the context both of the carnage and of the necessity of an aid convoy, but we also drew your attention back to events in Aleppo in Syria in 2016. So if you're going to send me a message saying, why aren't you talking about this, double standards, I mean, at least listen to the programme that you're criticising. Otherwise, you run a very real risk of looking very stupid. Paul's in Sladeburn in Lancashire. Paul, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I'm a Brexiteer. I've always been very nervous about ringing you previously, but I thought I'd give it a go.
Well, we're going to be fine, Paul. What can I do to help? Do you want a cup of tea? You all right? Do you want a biscuit? It's all good.
I just wanted to make the point. Everybody talks about new housing in terms of estates and new towns. And, of course, there are going to be estates and new towns. But I live in a very rural community where the market town at the centre of the community has been swamped with new housing estates, as your other callers have talked about. But the little villages that surround the market town are treated as if there's some kind of sacred cow.
Yes.
We live in an area of extending natural beauty, and no development is allowed at all. But I've got to say, when a village has got 30 or 40 houses, are 2 or 3 new houses really going to cause such such a problem. And I think the relief that would give, it would help the local schools in the rural communities, help the local doctors, help our buses to keep running. I think there's a real upside from limited development in our villages. We don't have to always think about new housing estates and new towns.
It's not either or, and I guess some of what you described would sound a little bit like nibbling at the sides of the problem, but it changes the conversation as well as the housing supply. I see it. I mean, you're in the Ribble Valley there, aren't you?
Yeah.
So that's sort of dry stone wall central. You can see why the protests would be successful or passionate. I spend a lot of time in Norfolk, not as much as I like to, and there I've seen exactly what you describe. I have seen new properties going up on the fringes of the established towns and villages, as opposed to focusing on the big cities like Norwich or Swaffham, and just building ever expanding urban sprawl. Instead, you're having a smaller sprawl on the outskirts of villages. It's a good point. Why do you think it doesn't happen? Because the numbers aren't big enough. If I'm a property developer, I want to build 1,000 houses. Why would I waste my time building 5? Answer: government steps in and helps the smaller operators.
No, I get that, but there's a big upside as well for small local developments. If you're going to build a single house, it's probably going to be a local developer that does it, or a local builder. It brings employment to the area. It means that people are spending at the local merchants.
I like your thinking. So it's, whether it's pain or not, and this conversation has questioned the idea that it is definitely pain to have developments on your doorstep. Whatever it is, it gets spread a little more by what you describe.
Exactly. It is nibbling at the edges. I completely agree with you. It's not going to solve the problem, but it's a contribution, and as you say, it's not either or. I think we should think about the whole picture, because small developments in the village will help those villages, in my opinion.
Well, of course they will.
Would burn me at the stake for saying this. But it's my view that I think it would.
More customers for the local shop if the local shop is still there. More clients for the local tradesman. More.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way we need to do it. Unfortunately, elements of the debate or the conversation about population in this country in recent years have been completely polluted by racists, and that is why you can't have clear-eyed and open conversations about demographics and population and the necessity. I just remember a bloke in Bishop Stortford, before I really came across this sort of bigotry on a regular basis, a bloke in Bishop Stortford rang in to complain about the number of people in his local shop. And I always remember thinking, well, if I was a shopkeeper, I'd be pretty happy to have a busy shop. But you do you. It's 11:01. It is 4 minutes after 11, and nobody set off the klaxon. Little tribute to Alan Davis and his colleagues at QI there, because I thought that in the context, and to be fair, this is me probably not reading the room as well as I like to, I thought someone would mention the old chestnut about golf courses. I think it's quite an important golf course. When people say, we haven't got room for new houses, we haven't got room, and then people like me say, I think you'll find that 84.9% of this country is covered with golf courses. I made up that figure, but the percentage of the country that is covered with golf courses is arrestingly high, and they never stop. Building new golf courses. So it's not tiny percentages, but a significant illustration of why that often pops up during that conversation. But it didn't today. Speaking, actually, a few of you asking about Oz on Twitter. I can see Alan has found him now. Thanks for keeping me in the loop, Alan. But I've tweeted a couple of compliments about Oz Chatterjee's coverage from Kyiv. So if you follow me on Twitter, then Oz's handle, which is, I think, pretty much as you'd expect Oz Chatterjee to be spelled, Ozkaterji. But you can follow him and keep an eye on his dispatches from there. And speaking of people who you should follow on Twitter, there's a rather splendid chap called Roland Smith, who is in many ways the godfather of what has fast become a very popular feature on the programme, and which we have been a little worried may not survive the general election.
Unhinged headline.
But it has. I'm delighted to report that the Daily Telegraph comment pages have stepped up to the challenge of ensuring that although we no longer have unhinged government, we still have unhinged headlines. Take your pick. This is from someone called Rory Gagan. It's a question, so I suppose you could give him the benefit of the doubt. It might be a QTWAIN. So someone has actually written and presumably been paid for an article beneath the headline, "Is James Timpson the most dangerous man in Britain?" But possibly is not the most unhinged headline that the Telegraph have already managed to publish. Here's one by Annabel Denham. "Middle England ought to be in a state of sheer panic." Sheer panic. And I think the man who is now challenging Alistair Heath for the unhinged crown, and this is as much to do with quantity as it is quality, because there was still that triple-barreled fella who thought that young people should do military service in order to say thank you for all the sacrifices that the old people made during lockdown. That's probably the most unhinged headline of the last few months. But Tim Stanley provides quantity and quality. He's written something, and I have to triple check. It's why I rely on Roland's account, because Roland doesn't fall for the parodies. He so that you don't have to, actually looks at the Daily Telegraph comment section. This chap's written an article under the headline, "Our first Dalek Chancellor wants to turn Britain into Scarrow," or Scarrow. I'm not 100% clear on how to pronounce this stuff. And I think finally, and it's the same bloke, it's Tim Stanley once again, this is so utterly at odds with observable reality that you have to wonder whether the people writing it even believe it anymore. "Farage doesn't want to crush our liberal order, he wants to save it." Okay.
Unhinged headline.
So now we turn our attention to a conversation that I don't really want to have. Andrew Mitchell has become Shadow Foreign Secretary. He steps up from Deputy, which means that David Cameron has got his trotters up in Nice again. David Cameron has done one. He has slung his hook. We need to play the Danny Dyer clip, don't we? With Danny Dyer clip, can we break out the Danny Dyer clip? Because he's done it again. David Cameron he's cleared off to Nice to put his trotters up, the twerp. And it focuses attention once again upon David Cameron's role in this country's national decline since 2015, when he was absolutely cock-a-hoop about his election victory against Ed Miliband. Indeed, he famously warned that we must vote for him in order to avoid chaos with Ed Miliband. I mean, in a world of counterfactuals, who wouldn't take chaos with Ed Miliband over what they have done instead? And of course, in the aftermath of Brexit, David Cameron was widely perceived as having fled the scene of his own crime, although no one put it quite as well as Danny Dyer.
Going back to this whole Brexit thing, when you know you're judging them on Brexit, they don't know nothing about it. Who knows about Brexit?
Yeah, quite.
No one's got a clue what Brexit is. Yeah, you watch Question Time. It's comedy.
Were you no clearer when Jeremy Corbyn explained
No, I got
Labour's
the clue.
policy?
No one knows what it is. It's like this mad riddle that no one knows what it is, right? So what's happened to that David Cameron who called it on? Let's be fair.
I think you're referring to our former Prime Minister.
Yeah, but how comes he can scuttle off? He called all this on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has no regrets.
Where is he? He's in Europe, in Nice, with his trotters up. Yeah. Where is the geezer? I think he should be held accountable for it. He should be held accountable for it.
It's a valid point. A lot of people do feel that all politicians...
We could probably lose the last few seconds of that. Well, no, you can't, because you get the final bleep in there, but you can't hear what the final bleep is. You have to just imagine him rapping his jaws around that word and delivering it with such undiluted venom. Very rarely do I regret the fact that I appear, or we share our time together in daylight hours, or indeed on a properly regulated platform. Because if this was an internet show, indeed, there's quite often some profanity on my Full Disclosure podcast because the rules are different. But very, very rarely does that bother me. But I wish, you can find it, and I'm sure you've heard it before. But my goodness me, we must get him on. The only downside, do you know what the only downside of that clip is? Do you know what the only downside of it is? He obviously doesn't listen to us. Because literally impossible to arrive at the conclusion that nobody knew what was going to happen with Brexit if you've been listening to this show since 2016. So I can live with that. Admiration doesn't have to be mutual, but I would love to get him on Full Disclosure. Quite a few of you suggesting that we absolutely must. So where is the geezer? Well, until yesterday, he was back in the Foreign Office and the House of Lords. I don't want to phrase the question like this, but I don't think I've got much choice. Has he got away with it? Has David Cameron got away with being one of the worst contributors to British politics in 50 years, 100 years, ever? Because through a combination of luck and circumstance, so many people have come along after him who were more obviously awful or more obviously responsible for the mess, that David Cameron sort of gets off the hook. So, I mean, who would you pick on this? You know, if you still think Brexit was a good idea, then realistically you should be carrying David Cameron around the room on your shoulders, not Nigel Farage. If you think that the decline of government was a consequence of Boris Johnson getting into the House of Commons, then you might be blaming Boris Johnson, not David Cameron. But David Cameron's more responsible for Brexit than Nigel Farage and more responsible for the decline of UK government than Boris Johnson. Could you have created an ecosystem in which Liz Truss could become Prime Minister if David Cameron hadn't bet the House on a referendum in order to stop whatever the current iteration of the anti-EU racist party is from winning a seat or keeping a seat in Clacton, for example, which was Douglas Carswell's constituency when he was a UKIP MP. And in order to stop other people from defecting in the way that Douglas Carswell had defected, he decided to promise the right wing of his party a referendum on EU membership. And we all know how that worked out. And you track the corruption, the decline, the normalisation of lies, the abandonment of reality, the attack upon standards. You track all of that from, well, it depends how you're feeling, frankly. Do you track it from the referendum result, in which case, in a way, he's off the hook, albeit that the Remain campaign was pretty lacklustre and he was supposed to be doing it in conjunction with Jeremy Corbyn, who refused to be in the same room as him, if memory serves, or do you track it from the decision to call the referendum? I think you track it from the decision to call the referendum. So 40 minutes after 11 is the time. He has left the front bench. He's probably returned to his, was it a gypsy caravan that he was reported to have installed in one of his back gardens in order to write his memoirs. And he becomes now the subject of political historians. It's the shortest comeback I can remember, politically speaking, and it is now over. How will history judge David Cameron is perhaps the more obvious way to ask this question. But I think that leaves far too much room for a pretense of positivity. The man is a moron for not foreseeing what anybody could have told him would happen in the context of trying to pander to the fantasy mongerers to the right of his own ideological position. Brexit wouldn't, and we'll go through all of this, but one of the main reasons why Brexit happened, and remember, if you still think Brexit was a good idea, then you should love David Cameron. So in some ways, it's for you to work out why you don't. Shepherd's Hut. Austerity. This extraordinary combination of hubris, arrogance and entitlement, which meant that they would suck the marrow out of the country, closing social capital hubs, closing libraries, closing Sure Start centres, defunding councils to a degree that they simply couldn't provide some basic services, ripping the heart out of some communities, and then wondering why in 2016 members of those communities turned around and sought to give the government, which was allied with the Remain campaign, sought to give the government a bloody nose. It's the most overlooked element of, it's not overlooked, it's just probably not discussed as much as it should be, of the whole of the last decade, is the way that austerity laid the groundwork for Brexit. And then he legged it. He went to Nice and put his trotters up. And the venom with which Danny Dyer speaks, and Dyer is clearly one of those people who is very, very bright, but doesn't think he's got a good grasp of the facts. So I often find that very, very bright people have got a very good grasp. It's like the opposite of Jacob Rees-Mogg syndrome, if you like. Very, very highly educated, but as thick as mince. Someone who doesn't consider themselves to be very, very informed, but demonstrates great salience and acuity every time they open their mouth. And he's dead right to focus on Cameron. Very few people did, even then. Even back then, very few people were focusing in, were zoning in on Cameron, who bet our house, that's the point, he bet your future on his own survival, and he lost, and then he cleared off the twerp. So is he going to get away with it? Or has he already got away with it? Do you think that Cameron has somehow managed to evade and avoid responsibility for his role in our national decline? 0345 6060 973. But one way to preempt that question, of course, is to ask, what was Cameron's role? How much responsibility, this is where I really want you to go, how much responsibility does David Cameron bear for the mess that the country and the Conservative Party became post-2015? When he was doing a lap of honour, he was practically one step away from an open-top bus in 2015. And if you measure the country's performance, and certainly the Conservative Party's performance since 2015, and we haven't even touched upon his regrettable associations with various businesses and business interests, how much responsibility, how much of this is on David Cameron, okay? Or, you want to make it really simple, what's the single worst thing he did? If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. The reason that I think he's got away with it, since you ask, is because when Liz Truss walks into a room, nobody respectable applauds, right? When Boris Johnson walks into a room, Nadine Dorries sets off a party popper and nobody respectable applauds. Johnson's reputation outside the world of Unhinged headlines and Nadine Dorries' fever dreams, Johnson's reputation is done for. He's got criminal convictions, chased out of Parliament by his own misdeeds, too cowardly to let the people of Uxbridge decide upon what his future should be. So Johnson's reputation is toast. Truss's reputation is truly ridiculous. Farage continues to bleat nonsense about what a victim he is and how awful foreigners are. And people continue to lap it up. That's the point. That people's opinions of Farage haven't really changed. If you like racism, you like him. If you hate racism, you hate him. Cameron, however, can still, I imagine, walk into respectable gatherings and hold his head high. Whereas, under my analysis, he probably has more to answer for than the rest of them put together. It was the weirdest chapter in How They Broke Britain. It was the weirdest chapter. That and the Cummings chapter, for reasons that I won't go into now. But the Cameron chapter was the weirdest chapter because it felt like a tesseract, you know? I always use that word incorrectly. Let me think of a better example. It felt like a jigsaw, and I hadn't even realised. So I had all these pieces in front of me. There's 10 chapters I wrote originally, 11 in the end for the paperback. So 10 chapters in front of me, and I've got, say, 1,000 jigsaw pieces, and I'm going to do 10 different jigsaws. I had no idea how many pieces of the jigsaw would slot effortlessly into the David Cameron chapter. So, how has he got away with it? Is a question you might like to have a crack at as well. 23 minutes after 11, probably the most memorable phrase from Danny Dyer's diatribe against David Cameron back in the day, or at least the one that I can repeat on a family programme, was that he should be held to account for it. He should be held to account for it. Speaking exclusively about Brexit, he should be held to account for everything, shouldn't he? So how come Cameron's got away with it while almost all of the rest of them, with the possible exception of Theresa May, emerged with their reputations fatally tarnished. It won't matter in some quarters. I don't make that clear. But Cameron, I think, will probably welcoming him back into the cabinet, making him Foreign Secretary, putting me in the House of Lords, speaks of a regard in which Boris Johnson and Liz Truss are clearly no longer held. Why? Why does he get away with it? David's in Lewisham. David, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello.
Hello, David. You sound surprised. You sound surprised. Oh, it's Daniel. Daniel in Lewisham. Daniel. I was about to do a little routine there about you sound surprised, and can you just confirm that we didn't ring you? You did, but I got your name wrong, so it's a good job I didn't do that. I'd have sounded like a right flump. What would you like to say, Daniel?
I think I always thought he has got away with it. I think there is an argument that he is possibly the worst of that string of Tory prime ministers because of what he sort of allowed to happen. And I know you touched on with austerity. I still don't think it's accepted in some parts of the country just how bad that was and the impact that had.
Why is that? Why is it not better understood how bad it was, how awful it was?
I think because for a lot of people, I mean, also speaking from a personal point of view, it didn't necessarily affect me. I sort of knew about it because, you keep up with the stories and you see where it does impact people. But from a personal point, it wasn't. For a lot of people, I think they go, oh, it wasn't that bad. It's not as bad as people sort of said it was. And that sort of idea of, oh, well, that's still, I think that there's still
people
that idea
don't like
of,
talking about difficulty, do they? People, a show like this might have taken calls from people whose lived experience was shocking, but on the other hand, you'd always have the equivalent of 30p Lee popping up to claim that they were work shy or lazy or something, whereas people were truly struggling. I always remember the teachers whose kids had the outdoor coats, so they'd have to put something else on when they went out because it was even colder outside than it was inside. And he brought all that in. He brought all that on as an ideological choice, masquerading as economic necessity.
Yeah, and I think that's what he has to be held accountable for most. I mean, I know that, I'll be honest, I don't have the exact numbers, but the austerity caused more access deaths, or as many, I think, as COVID.
Gosh.
And we don't, it's not really talked about. I think it's, there was I think it was the British Medical Journal sort of where that sort of figure came from.
We're still reaping what was sown during austerity, which probably has been overshadowed by what we're reaping still as a consequence of COVID. What is it? Here's a theory for you. I think that entitlement in this country runs a lot deeper than one generation. So Rishi Sunak, head boy at Winchester, but the son of a doctor. So he walks into a room and some people in it are still conscious of that background not being platinum. Cameron walks into a room, I think there are baronets on his family tree, went to Eton, all of that. Johnson's an anomaly in so many ways, so I'll leave him out of it for now. But Cameron's self-regard / self-assurance is so extraordinary that it almost becomes contagious. Whereas by the end, Sunak began to look like even he didn't believe it. He began to look vulnerable. When Cameron started whistling or humming on his way back into Downing Street after resigning, that spoke of a self-regard that I find almost impossible to fully understand.
Yeah, and I think he was sort of treated differently by especially certain parts of the media because he's the right sort of chap and all that kind of thing.
Precisely that, because he's got a patrician demeanour.
Yeah. And I just think it also speaks to a wider problem we have in terms of really calling out, I think, particularly elements of right-wing policies.
Yes.
In terms of what he's still seen as this sort of, I think from certain people, he's still seen as kind of a centrist.
So you've got the mild,
and he just wasn't.
Yeah, he's a mild case of Rees-Mogg syndrome. Is it because he has that patina of posh plausibility? There's something about the English condition that means that many of us don't see him as clearly as we would if, for example, he spoke like Danny Dyer does, And therefore you think, well, he can't be that bad. He can't be that rotten. In Rees-Mogg's case, he can't be that stupid. Cameron could be the worst of them all, but also the most plausible, the most socially comfortable.
Yeah, I think so. And I just think it's, it's still, like you said, it's still not sunk in, I think, in terms of what the impact of austerity was.
And that's why you
for some
think he's
people.
got away with it, because it never will. And if it ever did, then it wouldn't be his fingerprints that we saw all over it for reasons. Thank you, Daniel, or David, as I gather some friends call you. It is coming up to 11:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You like this one. Sometimes I do those dreadfully long introductions, and I think I haven't got the question right. And sometimes I do them, and I think I've got the question right, but I've got it right 10 times. There are 10 questions here, all of which are equally interesting, and any of which you're welcome to answer. It's just coming up to 11:30. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. And Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 32 minutes after 11 is the time. How many Metro mayors does it take to change a light bulb? I have absolutely no idea, but they were all gathering today at Downing Street with the new Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, the Labour Metro mayors, and indeed the Conservative Metro Mayor, Ben Houchen, who had some very warm words to say about Keir Starmer and the sort of hope that the new government would rise to some of the challenges. In fact, let's just have a little listen to it.
I think after 14 years, there's a lot of internal fighting. There are a lot of problems that come with any government after 14 years in power. It was very telling, particularly at Keir Starmer. He was very fresh, he was energetic, he was keen to get on with things. Like I say, if you can follow through on those plans, we all want him to succeed because the country succeeds. And like I say, I've offered the olive branch. I want to work with him to get things done, and let's hope the relationship blossoms from here.
The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, joins me now from TfL's HQ in Southwark. Couldn't you have adopted a bit of that attitude to some of the previous incumbents in Downing Street?
Well, Ben's lucky he gets to work with a decent Labour Prime Minister. I had 5 awful Tory Prime Ministers, so that's the difference between Ben and I. But the serious point that Ben makes is, Keir Starmer today was the Keir Starmer I've known for 25 years when he was a lawyer, as an MP and as the leader of our party, somebody who rolls his sleeves up and gets things done. And just 4 or 5 days after winning that historic landslide victory, he's been to Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and he met with us as soon as he could before going off to Washington today for that NATO summit. And that's, and today's meeting was 12 of us coming together on equal terms with our Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Pat McFadden, who's the Cabinet Office Minister in charge of delivery, and talking through how we can, working together, address some of the challenges and problems that, Keir and Angela and the team will inherit.
Are you going to become more powerful?
Well, I think all of us, all 12 of us, will be given more powers and resources. The fact that we've got an open door policy now with our Prime Minister means all of us, by virtue of that, become more powerful. And what we do know is that in the King's speech, there will be a Take Back Control bill, which will be devolving powers and resources away from Whitehall, because if you remember, the promise was taking back control from Brussels to Whitehall, but those powers will be devolved around the country, in City Hall in London and city halls around the country. So all of us, but more importantly our communities, will become more powerful and will be seen change for the better.
What about the simple question of being held to account? I'm thinking more of the government than of you in the first instance. A lot of the questions that have been put to you on our Speak to Sadiq feature over the last few years have, rightly or wrongly, and I think, to be fair, mostly rightly, solicited the response that this is something over which you don't have control, or that this is something where you haven't felt properly supported by Downing Street. Are you more exposed now, Sadiq Khan, politically than you have been during your tenure as Mayor of London?
Yes, and rightly so. But one of the things that Keir said this morning, and I agree with him, is one of the conundrums central government has when it comes to devolving more powers and resources to mayors is when things go wrong, people point the finger at government when it's the mayor's fault, and it works the other way around as well. And I think it's in all of our interests as public servants who trying to win back the trust and confidence of the public to say to the public, look, we're now going to work together, and so the buck stops with us. And by us, I mean me, the mayor, and Keir, the Prime Minister. And that way of working together means, yes, greater accountability for people like you told me to account, the public told us to account, but it means also we can do far more with the same amount of money. It's really exciting.
Away from economics, there is an ITV News interview with him that has prompted some criticism from your colleague, the Labour MP Apsana Begum, in which he appeared, and people have drawn comparisons with how he dealt with anti-Semitism in the party. He has appeared to dismiss concerns about the Labour Party losing the support of Muslim voters, the specific issue of a breakdown of trust between the Labour Party and Muslim voters. I suspect you'll tell me that you didn't see the interview, but would you be concerned that he's already facing criticism from Labour MPs for not properly recognising the scale of that problem, which has seen some of your colleagues who you would have been expecting to bump into in Downing Street, not even in the House of Commons anymore?
I think we need to have the humility as a political party to, at the same time as celebrating the amazing success last Thursday, to recognise there are some people who couldn't find it themselves to vote Labour, and those are people who've always voted Labour, and we can't assume or presume that we'll always be as popular as we were last Thursday. But we should try and earn back the confidence of those who couldn't give it to us last Thursday. It breaks my heart that anybody thinks they can't vote Labour because of their faith, their background, and because of any particular policy. And what we need to do is to try and earn back their support. And I'll redouble my efforts to do what I can as a member of the Labour Party to win back their confidence and their support.
So, I mean, you called for a ceasefire much earlier than Keir Starmer did. What practical policies would you like to see announced? What practical differences between this government and the last one do you want to see front and centre?
Well, I think what we need to do as a new government, and I say we because I'm a member of this party, is notwithstanding having a majority of 172, work on the basis that every day we've got to govern for not just those who voted Labour, but for those that didn't as well. And that means today I was really pleased that Ben was there, that the Conservative mayor was around the table. And I'll tell you this, James, there have been many occasions where the Tory Prime Minister has invited just Tory mayors to Downing Street and not Labour mayors. And the fact that the Labour Prime Minister invited a Tory mayor bodes well. And the same goes for those members of the public in London and across the country unhappy with any particular issue. It could be because they voted Green this time, for an independent candidate, for a Reform candidate, for Lib Dems, for the SNP. We need to be speaking to all of them and listening to the reasons why they couldn't find it themselves to vote Labour last Thursday.
I'm going to steer you back to the Middle East because it was, I think, a valid defence of Keir Starmer that he couldn't achieve anything in opposition. He couldn't go as far as many people, I suspect yourself included, wanted him to go because it was relatively meaningless and it would have just been hot air. He's Prime Minister now. He is running the state of this country and essentially, although not, of course, nominally the head of it, and the relationships between the UK as a sovereign country and the sovereign state of Israel are likely to change. What changes do you want to see?
We've already seen, just in the last 4 days, a Labour government disagreeing with the last government in relation to the ICC. You saw what happened a lot over the last couple of days. You've seen already in the last couple of days the Labour Prime Minister speaking to both Mahmoud Abbas and Benjamin Netanyahu. You've already seen the confirmation of the policy manifesto in relation to recognition of the state of Palestine. I would expect when Prime Minister Keir Starmer goes to Washington and meets President Biden, I'd be astonished if they didn't discuss the Middle East and Gaza and the catastrophe that's happening there with 40,000 men, women, and children having lost their lives, the hostages still being kept by Hamas. I'd be surprised that it wasn't raised by Keir, if not by President Biden. That's the difference being in office makes in relation to the ability to influence things.
And speaking of the difference, what will you point to first for Londoners as evidence of things you've been able to do that you wouldn't have been able to do under a previous government?
Well, yesterday's announcement by Rachel Reeves is one that I lobbied for and I welcome. She has said there should be housing targets. Why is that important? Because it brings pressure on councils, people like me, but also developers, to bring forward schemes to get housing done. Already, on the first Monday in the job, she's done something that will transform the life chances of Londoners who'll be able to get on the housing ladder. What I'm hoping over the course of the summer is further meetings with Angela Rayner to discuss clauses in the Take Back Control bill in the First King's speech. And I'll be working closely with Rachel Reeves to try and get things in the budget in autumn which benefit our capital city.
And a word, if you would, on Peter Hendy's arrival in the House of Lords and indeed in the Ministry of Transport. Why is that cracking news?
Peter Hendy is somebody I've known for many years. He's somebody who's worked with first Ken Livingstone, then Boris Johnson. I was advised not to take him on as the chair of one of my boards because he'd worked with the Tory mayor. Nonsense. He's talented. And that's why I took him back on. I've worked closely with Peter for the last 8 years. He told me on Sunday the great news. I was sworn to secrecy about him being a Minister of Rail in a Labour government. Why is it important? He was the TfL commissioner for many years, transformed TfL. He then became chair of Network Rail. He was an ally inside government when the government tried to, forgive my words, shaft us during the pandemic. I think he'll be a cracking minister of rail, and I'll be lobbying him to try and allow me in future years to take over those commuter trains that come into London that are currently run by privatised train operating companies who provide a less optimal service. I think we can do a better job.
A final question. Thames Water proposing bill increases of 44%. Despite having made a profit this year, they've still got debts of £15 billion. Ofwat publishing draft rulings on how much extra water companies can charge their customers this year. For reasons you've alluded to already, Sadiq Khan, I now get to ask you a bit about national politics as well as local politics, because, as you say, your party is now the party of government. Londoners are going to see their bills going up again, aren't they?
It's unacceptable. I've already been in touch with Steve Reid, and he in touch with me. I mean, we need to put Thames Water in special measures. I mean, it's just unacceptable. The year on year worsening of services, but the year on year increase in bills. And frankly speaking, Ofwat need to pull their finger out as a regulator and do a much better job holding into account Thames Water. You've had previous shareholders taking out huge sums of money from this company, leveraged this company up to the hill. This company had zero debt when it was privatised by the Tories back in the 1980s, and I think Steve Reid and the Labour government are going to sort this mess out.
You mentioned at the outset that the 5 Tory prime ministers with whom you'd been compelled to work had all been awful. Who was the worst?
Liz Truss / Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much indeed. Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London. There's a mental image that nobody asked for, but I thank you, and I presume Sadiq Khan will be joining me soon for another Speak to Sadiq, which is going to have a very different feel, because I found it, between you and me, incredibly frustrating when so many questions that you put to him would be answered with the claim that he couldn't help that, or that it was the fault of Downing Street, or the fact that they had an uncooperative government in place in Westminster prevented him from doing some of the things he would have liked to do as Mayor of London. He didn't say David Cameron. That's why I asked that slightly unprofessional question at the end, because to that we return. I'll ask him why next time I see him. Is he still there? Why not David Cameron?
Oh, actually, when I first became mayor, I was the only mayor in the country, and both David Cameron and George Osborne actually were very good. Credit where it's due. They were collegiate. They wanted to work with me. Both Cameron and Osborne understood the importance of the capital city to our country's well-being. I mean, in fact, David Cameron asked me to help him in the Remain campaign, and I tried to help him. I was, towards the end when I became mayor. I think he made a colossal error of judgment in calling that referendum, but he did work collegially with me in the time that he was Prime Minister.
There you go, straight answer. Thank you very much, Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. That's the first vote for Cameron, not deserving to be seen as one of the key architects of the national and the party's decline. And I certainly wasn't expecting it to come from that source. 11:47 is the time. I like this from Graham, but I'm just going to check that it all is suitable for this time of day on the programme. There's some references to drug taking here. I don't know whether that demands a trigger warning, but I'll give you certainly a heads up. One day we'll do a phone-in on what's the difference between a heads up and a trigger warning. Trigger warnings seem to get the usual suspects into such a tizzy, when really, if you just called it a heads up, they'd probably all be able to relax. Anyway, does David Cameron need to be held to account? Oh yes, writes Graham. Like all addicts, there is always someone that enables. Cameron dropped a bag of austerity on the table, heated up the spoon, ready for a fix of Brexit. At that point, nobody noticed someone opening a May, Johnson or Truss. By the time the addicts were smoking a Henry of Sunak, it was too late. And now the whole country has to go into rehab. I understood some of that, but I have to confess not all of it. But I felt that it was creative enough to merit a full recitation. 11:48 is the time. Has he got away with it, though? How much blame does Cameron deserve for what has gone on as he shuffles off the political coil for the second time? And has he got away with it? Is the blame going to follow him around? Daniel's in Belfast. Daniel, what would you like to say?
I think the guy that just wrote it, Graham, kind of summarizes exactly what I want to say quite perfectly. I think what Cameron did and what that represented for the Tories that were to come was an opportunity And I'm not sure whether he did this intentionally or not, but I think he acted entirely out of self-interest. And then when it didn't go the way he wanted, it just kind of slinked off.
I never know about that. I never know about that. Whether he could have handed over in a more reasonable manner, or whether actually he was right to say, listen, you've completely rejected what I wanted, therefore I have no business being here trying to deliver or even trying to facilitate the delivery of the thing that I have been quite explicit about thinking will be awful. Do you see what I mean? That's one area where I'd defend him a little bit.
I don't know. I think if you're going to be in a position like being the Prime Minister, I think it's your responsibility to kind of handle these things, whether or not they go the way that you personally want them to go.
So he should have. And Theresa May took over, although it was an incredibly chaotic leadership battle.
It was a shambles with Theresa May, but she did try.
So many.
And I think what David Cameron managed to pull off represented to kind of the more sort of. I don't know, appropriate word
fair
for
enough.
it.
No, it's that notion of gambling. Because he didn't just gamble with his own money, he gambled with ours.
Yeah,
metaphorically
and then the
speaking.
People who came after him, I think, kind of saw that as an opportunity of like, oh, well, we can kind of do what we want.
Could have stayed in Parliament as one of the part of the grouping that got cold in 2019, couldn't he? He really could have actually dedicated the rest of his life to like a sort of Heseltine type figure, warning of what was on the horizon, knowing that it would actually happen, which is very different from Project Fear, saying, sorry, let me explain to you as a former Prime Minister what is going to have to happen in Northern Ireland. And Johnson, I'd never thought of that before, mate. And there you are in Belfast, appropriately enough. But he should have stuck around to be a thorn in the side of all the Brexit liars, because he knew better than anybody how dangerous their lies would be.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he was kind of allowed to slink off, and nobody really batted an eye at it, kind of to like people like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and even to a degree Sunak. I think that represents this idea that like, oh, we can kind of come in and do what we want, and if it doesn't work out for us, we can just sort of
I don't know actually that is on him. I think that certainly Johnson would have been very much committed to that worldview, even without David Cameron having preceded him in Prime Minister in Downing Street. But yeah, you're right. That notion, that sense of impunity that they all seem to behave. Well, it doesn't matter if it all goes wrong. I'll be fine. He seems to embody that actually in a way that you would, if you weren't stopping to think about it today, you'd probably associate more with one or two of the other names that we've mentioned today. Thank you, Daniel. Ian from Belfast to Cologne. Ian is there. Ian, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi there. I've got to get my tongue around this sort of German. Anyway, look, I think Brexit was an awful thing. I'm British. I live over here. I've lived over here for many years, and I've suffered badly because of Brexit. But on the other hand, things have taken a bit of a turn here. Cameron's decision to allow the referendum has seemed to have kept the right and the nationalists at bay from the political side, which isn't the case in France and Germany and obviously Holland.
Not the decision to hold the referendum, but the reality of its consequences is what has played the role that you describe. So if he'd lost, they'd probably still be agitating for one more in France and Germany, wouldn't they?
And that's it. And I think because of the Brexit decision, which is awful, and I agree with everything, all your opinions, it's kept these fractions at bay and under control, a sort of thing. And the funny thing that's coming up here at the moment is that I hear a lot of comments that UK might become a stable political base for investment because of our political situation with a very strong middle and left-hand faction in Parliament, rather than having the right-hand fractions coming through in the nationalists, which are making countries like France and Germany, even with the AfD, and Holland, as we all know, very unstable. So
entirely unintentional positive to take away
true.
From his premiership, but a positive nonetheless.
That's right. And that's my, what I wanted to say. That's what I'm hearing coming through here as comments, and it's quite an interesting,
I like it.
Unwanted development really for him. But it's something that might turn up for us for the
maybe.
good.
Although, how close did we come last weekend to seeing? I know actually Ian's point stands. Even if Marine Le Pen had triumphed at the weekend, her Euro scepticism has been heavily leavened by the reality of seeing what leaving the European Union actually does. In fact, I don't think any of the traditionally Eurosceptic parties of potential government on the European continent would now actually want to leave the European Union if they were offered the opportunity. It's 11:54. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Greensill, of course, not really getting a mention, but that's not part of his legacy as Prime Minister. The class question of why Cameron, and I could be wrong about this, history may refute me or contradict me on this, but and also I'm a little bit obsessed with class, as you know. But would David Cameron, if David Cameron and Rishi Sunak walked into the same room, who would polite society have the lower opinion of and why? I'm going to try and answer that question myself. I think polite society would have a lower opinion of Rishi Sunak. I don't know why. We've dedicated more hours than is healthy to the question of how he managed to fluff things up so completely and how much of it was actually his fault rather than a consequence of inheritance or legacy. Whereas with Cameron, I think polite society probably still views him relatively politely. And I think that's got more to do with that patina of patrician entitlement that Sunak doesn't have than it does with their actual performances as Prime Minister. It is coming up to 11:56. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What are we going to do in the next hour? I'm toying with the idea of turning your attention back to the situation in America, where Joe Biden's problems still seem to be growing. He's confident that his voters still support him, but a sixth senior American politician today added his voice to calls for Biden to let somebody else fight the next general election. Some of the other stories contending for your attention or contending for our attention today include a really weird one. I don't think we'll do this one, but I'll just tell you about it. It's a really weird story that highlights something that always gets my goat. The headline says, "Boss who said secretary looked nice harassed her." And so you immediately read that headline and start thinking that's outrageous. You're not allowed to say that someone looks nice now. But you read into the story further, and it turns out that the boss who has been found to have committed sexual harassment also shared graphic details with this young woman about his former girlfriend cheating on him with a much younger man and made loads of other comments that made her feel uncomfortable. Few things point to the proliferation of blokishness in newsrooms than headlines like this, trying to sort of create the illusion that simply telling someone they look nice constitutes harassment. But the thing about this story that really caught my eye was the testimony of other female employees in the company who came to the defense of the boss. They came to the defense of the man found to have committed sexual harassment by really going for the young woman in a really rude way. The tribunal panel noted that one female colleague had made a personal attack on the woman bringing the complaint, a woman called Megan Bratt, calling her a Love Island reject and accusing her of flaunting herself on social media, appearing in a shocking state of attire and attending the office as though dressed for a night out. Another said she was faked up with fake tan and false eyelashes and claimed that she was a lot more revealing in her own photos than what was in the videos and pictures shown by Mr. Hall. And I'd never really come across that before. I'd never really thought of the possibility of a young woman bringing a sexual harassment case against a much older man, having the efforts or the attentions of female colleagues turned against her in defence of the bloke that had behaved inappropriately. There's a topic in there somewhere, but I haven't yet been able to work out where it is. Maybe you can, in which case you know absolutely what to do. Women, yeah, there you go. Women have a habit of supporting other women with a roundhouse kick to her tiara, says Jane. As a bloke, I don't know how qualified I am to dig into this topic. because I've got absolutely no experience of it. And at risk of sounding like a Times headline writer, I would worry a little bit that I might say something inappropriate. The story I want to talk about next is one that was slightly inspired by Oz Chatterjee and his dispatch from Kyiv, but has been rather more inspired by the behaviour of a Ukrainian tennis player at Wimbledon yesterday. Alina Svitolina, a 29-year-old, became visibly emotional after winning her fourth-round match and talked about how hard it had been to play tennis immediately after that attack on her home country and most notably, of course, on that children's hospital. I'm going to come at this quite hard and quite quickly, and I could be wrong, and it's your job to tell me if I am. But when she calls for Wimbledon to ban Russian players, she's absolutely right, isn't she? I mean, this is a situation that should never have been allowed to arise. It is 3 minutes after 12, and it is a question that I don't like because, punishing a sports person for the conduct of their political leaders seems like quite an odd road to go down. But there are historical precedents for this. And the escalation, if you like, of the war in Ukraine, notably yesterday when the Kyiv equivalent of Great Ormond Street was bombed, with the death toll potentially still rising, draws attention to the fact that Ukrainian players, never mind everybody else, but specifically Ukrainian players, are currently required to play alongside Russian players competing under a neutral flag. It must be weird because they're so close, aren't they? They spend their lives together, tennis players. It's amazing. Katie Bolter's going out. It's amazing how many of them go out with each other. But to essentially say to someone that you've known probably since you were 12 years old that you shouldn't be allowed to be here is something that I don't think sports people would do casually. She's the world number 21. She got a great result yesterday, and she was asked specifically about Wimbledon's policy of allowing Russian players to compete under a neutral flag or whether they should be banned, as they were in 2022. She replied, "I would prefer that. We tried every possible way to talk with many organisations." And I just want to come at this like a good old-fashioned phone-in show, a straight yes-no binary question, with a little side order of complication. The only side order of complication I will allow is someone who pays even more attention to these matters than I do to explain why the ban was in place in 2022 but is not in place now. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. So should Russian players be allowed to play at Wimbledon this year? And I want you to answer this question today. And your answer might be different today from what it would have been last week. It shouldn't be, because the atrocities and war crimes committed yesterday are simply the latest in a long and disgusting catalogue of atrocities and war crimes. But you run the risk, if you turn up at Wimbledon, even as a Ukrainian, you run the risk of playing against a Russian and not knowing what their attitude may be towards the atrocities undertaken by their president. In the next round, she plays a Russian. She plays a young woman who was born in Russia but switched federations to Kazakhstan in 2018. And this poor woman, who I feel enormously sorry for, she should be celebrating one of her most famous victories, and instead she's mourning the murder of some of her compatriots and contemplating the possibility of having to shake hands with a Russian opponent. And it doesn't have to be like that, because you can take the example of Elena Rybakina as support for not letting Russians play at Wimbledon. Asked whether she would shake Rybakina's hand in their quarter-final tie, Svitolina said she changed her nationality. So it means she doesn't want to represent her original country, so it works. So if you've got a deeper investment in sport than I have, or if you have a deeper investment in the Ukrainian cause than I have, I'd be particularly interested to hear your position on this. But if you have an investment in tricky questions, like the investment that I have, I want to know your reasons for answering this question in the way that you do. Should Wimbledon be telling Russian players that they are not allowed to compete? Have we made a terrible mistake by letting them come here? I always think people, when they say to Gary Lineker, stay out of politics, the idea that you can keep sport and politics separate is so naive, to be kind, and so ignorant, to be a little crueler. But it might be worth articulating why it is important. It might be worth articulating why sport does provide an opportunity to make powerful political points. The entire United States of America, I think, boycotted the Olympic Games in Moscow. It's one of the reasons why we did so well that year. The history books don't always reflect that. But did it send any message? What else do you think of? You think of the Black Power salute, for which athletes got into trouble. You think of Jesse Owens in Berlin in 1936, who made the most powerful political point of all by winning and being brilliant, which just drove a coach and horses through Adolf Hitler's master race rhetoric. So that's the second part of this question. Beyond the yes-no of it, beyond the binary, what would it actually achieve? And does it matter? You say to me, well, I don't know if it would achieve anything, but you can't not do the right thing because the consequences won't be as far-reaching as you hope. You have to do the right thing, and therefore we shouldn't be letting Russian players compete at Wimbledon. I haven't mentioned this to you yet because the last time I spoke about him, I came closest to crying on air than I've come in a very long time. But I think I was quite tired at the time, and I'm in a slightly more robust state of mind at the moment. But my friend Vladimir Kara-Murza has been moved from prison to a prison hospital in Russia at the moment, raising fears that he will become the latest prominent dissident of Vladimir Putin to be murdered. And thinking of Vladimir, and you've met Evgenia, she's been in the studio relatively recently. I think you've met Vladimir. You've certainly heard him on the phone. I don't know whether he was sitting with us. Thinking of what he is currently facing, he's been poisoned twice. It's a miracle that he's still alive. He returned to Russia knowing he'd be imprisoned. He is the latest in a short but proud line of patriotic Russians determined to do whatever they can to draw attention to the plight of their countrymen and women. And yet the Lawn Tennis Association of Great Britain says to other Russians, you can just change the flag under which you play. You don't have to disown Russia. We'll let you play as a neutral. And you can come here and enjoy SW19 in all its leafy glory. I don't know two things. I don't know why we haven't picked up on this topic before. I think it's a combination of the attack on the Children's Hospital yesterday and the sight of Elena Svitolina having to talk about this. She got a special permission to wear a black ribbon during the match, which is simultaneously powerful and paltry, isn't it? It's an incredibly sad day today for all Ukrainians. It was really difficult for me to be here and do anything. Just going on the court was extremely tough. If we punished Russian players, the message received back in Russia would be unignorable. Why are our heroes not playing? Answer, because of what Vladimir Putin is doing and what the world thinks of it. 10 minutes after 12 is the time. Let's kick off early on this one. Lee's in Hitchin. Lee, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
you
mate.
and I have spoken about a year ago, I think. I'm the yoga teacher, the guy who runs a small yoga charity who was volunteering out in Ukraine.
You went out to Ukraine, didn't you? I remember, yes.
That's right, and I've been there ever since. I've been there for nearly, 2.5 years now, and we now currently work in the Ukrainian state healthcare system in trauma rehabilitation, working with amputees. And we actually work at a children's hospital in Lviv.
So this has been a tough 24 hours a poignant 24 hours for you then.
It has, and I've gone through every emotion in the last 24 hours of rage, anger, upset. I was on the phone late last night to my team in Lviv because I've actually come back to the UK to fundraise for a few weeks.
Of which we will learn more later, I promise.
Thank you, James. And last night I was on the phone to my staff in Ukraine at a children's hospital, and they were saying to me, our work in trauma rehab is about helping, in this case, children feel safe in their bodies and feel safe in the space that they're in. And we do our own thought process when we're under the missile attack, when the sirens are going, is we think to ourselves, okay, I'm in a children's hospital. You rationalise it. I'm going to be okay. And last night my staff, in tears, said to me, how do I look these children in the eyes and tell them that they're safe? even in a children's hospital. And it's a tough day, James. So forgive me if I'm not as articulate as I would like to be this morning.
Great. You're doing great.
Thank you. And
I mean, what do you do, though? What did you say to your staff? I mean, you have to tell them that they're safe, and then they're watching footage on television or hearing stories about children in similar facilities elsewhere in the same country who are palpably or clearly not safe. So what do you say?
Yeah, we have to. Our job is to try and, in a way, inspire hope and show the very best of humanity to the people that we work with. So I would like to say that we tell them that they are safe, but right now, James, I don't know what we say.
No, that's
I don't know what we
say. Always the
especially
most powerful answer to any question, isn't it? I don't know.
Especially when we don't feel it ourselves, because children, the people around you, the people we work with, pick up on our emotions, and when we ourselves don't feel as grounded as perhaps we could be, it's very difficult.
When I ask you the next question, I want you to be completely as honest with me there as you were just before. But does it feel a bit silly to be talking about tennis?
Absolutely not. No,
Good.
absolutely not.
Good. Carry on then.
Maybe it would if I was in Lviv right now, but like I said, I've come back to the UK to fundraise, and one of the things that most strikes me when I come back to the UK is, anyone who returns from a war zone, is that sense of normality is really quite jarring. And also here in the UK, it does, to the larger extent, not necessarily in the political circles, but in day-to-day life, when you go for a coffee or you meet people for a chat, that Ukraine, at least the struggle of the people on the ground in Ukraine and just how horrendous the situation is at the front where the fighting is, that it has been largely forgotten. So anything that has us, I'm delighted today, and thank you for having me on, because it's really, I wish it were under different circumstances, but it's wonderful to actually be talking about Ukraine on national radio.
Yes. No, well, we did hear, we were live with Oz Chatterjee in Kyiv earlier as well, but I'm always conscious of the nature of news reporting, drawing the spotlight only when the truly awful things happen, and the longer a conflict goes on, the harder that simple truth becomes to bear. But let me steer you back to SW19. Would it be of any benefit to the Ukrainian people for Russian players to be banned from Wimbledon?
I believe my heart wants to scream yes. Yes, get them out, don't have them there. I feel that quite viscerally. You can probably hear in my voice I'm quite emotional. And from a Ukrainian player's perspective, you saw how upset Svitolina was yesterday.
You really did.
And coming back to London, I'm going to be quite frank with you. I've been sheltering from missiles and bombs. I've had over 11 friends killed now in the last 3 years. Everybody you know has friends and relatives killed. I work in an amputee rehab centre, so I see the very raw consequences of this war on a daily basis. I came back to London, and almost one of my first days back, I found myself in a social situation where I was stood next to a Russian. Now, I don't know what that person's view of the war is, but James, I actually had to go to the toilet, sit on the toilet. I was shaking, I was crying.
I can imagine.
Because in my mind, in my animalistic brain, these people have been trying to kill me for the last 3 years. They've killed my friends, the people I love. To be stood just next to them at a social event, it was impossible. So to expect a Ukrainian athlete to be stood on the other side of a tennis court facing a Russian, I cannot imagine what Svitolina must be going through and the emotions she must be experiencing. But I did say something to you. I want to try and be balanced. I want to try and be the yoga teacher here and emphasise, the humanity in all of us. And one of the things I said to your assistant producer before coming on was, tennis is a weird one, because typically athletes don't compete under their national flag. They're very much an individualistic sport.
You often don't know until you check the scoreboard what nationality somebody is, do you, if you're not a fully paid-up tennis fan?
So it's not like football. And, for example, the Olympics are taking place this summer. And, yes, Russian athletes will be competing under a neutral flag. But many of those sports in the Olympics actually have a grounding in military associations, especially in a militarized society like Russia. So a number of Russian athletes competing under neutral flags at the Olympics in Paris are actually Russian military or active reservists in the Russian military. Now, clearly this is is wrong on every level. I'm trying to be balanced and take the emotion out of it.
Tennis as being different. Do we play national anthems at the tennis? I don't think we do we?
We don't, no. And also, I don't know what happened this year, but I did a little bit of Googling a couple of weeks ago, thinking, how do I feel about tennis players playing? And I'm not sure if it happened this year, but last year, and please, the tennis expert, correct me on this, that last year, when they were readmitted, all the Russian players had to sign a statement denouncing the war in Ukraine. And, for example, Medvedev, unfortunately named, same shares as the name with somebody else, but Medvedev has also been quite vocal about the plight of the Ukrainians and his sympathy for them. So if someone isn't competing under a flag and has denounced the war in Ukraine, should we punish them by virtue?
What else could he do? In other words, except apply for asylum somewhere or change nationality. I like your balance, and I think you've done a better job of setting this question up than I did for reasons that are pretty clear. But I don't want to run out of time before I've asked you about the fundraising efforts that are currently underway.
Thank you, James. I've been back in the UK trying to fundraise specifically for a programme in a children's hospital in Lviv. I have to stress, because I don't want anyone to be confused and think we work at the one in Kyiv that was hit. So I don't want anyone wanting to support that hospital. Please do so through there's an official United 24 Ukrainian fundraising platform that is specifically fundraising for that hospital. But I'm fundraising to support the National Rehabilitation Centre in Lviv, where we provide therapy in the mental health clinic there for civilian and military adults, but also the adjacent children's hospital. We're starting a new programme and been invited to start there by the state healthcare system in Ukraine. But quite honestly, James, we're broke. So I've left my Ukrainian team there, who are now all trained up, working in the children's hospital, and I've come back to London to try and raise some money. But sadly, interest in Ukraine has waned substantially.
So how can people find out more about what you're doing and maybe help out?
It's a very small charity. It's called Fierce Calm. And I'm active on Twitter as Fierce Calm. If you Google Fierce Calm, you'll find us. And on my website, which I'm currently updating at the moment because I've been so involved in the front line in Ukraine, my website isn't updated as it should be, but our website, Fierce Calm, you can find information and how to donate on there.
I'll post the links shortly, and indeed the links, as you remind us, for the United 24 website as well. Thank you, Lee. Coincidence in a way that you were listening today, but neither happy nor unhappy. 90 minutes after 12 is the time. What do we reckon then? I mean, at first glance, as Lee says, it makes sense. At second glance, is it fair? And if you take someone like Medvedev, who's been an outspoken critic of his country's government's actions, what is the rationale for punishing him for things over which he exercises precisely zero control? And yet, on the other hand, how the hell can you expect anybody to break bread, let alone play tennis, with enemy citizens, enemy civilians, when the enemy's leader is a war criminal? It's 20 minutes after 12. It is 22 minutes after 12, and I like these kind of questions because they can be as simple or as complicated, can't they, as you want them to be. At first glance, should Russians be playing at Wimbledon? A question that assumes a new poignancy the day after Russia bombed a children's hospital in Kyiv. And at second glance, the ease of a simplistic answer, I think, diminishes accordingly. Lisbeth is in Eastbourne. Lisbeth, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I would say that I've been thinking of this for a long time, but no, they should not be able to play. It's a bit, if you look at it, if you saw South Africa in the older days, yes, then players were not able to go from South Africa to any other place to play. And the players, which was outside Africa, Denmark, England, they could not come and do something in South Africa either. So that was really how it worked, and it
that would be the precedent.
Like
that would be the precedent, and you'd have thought, an illegal war, and indeed various atrocities and war crimes, most recently on children. You would think, wouldn't you, that would perhaps merit similar levels of international attention as apartheid or as South Africa's history.
Yeah, they should not have been able to play the last 2 years either. It's there. The athletes need to make a choice. And even if the athletes doesn't carry the flag, they would always carry the flag.
Do you think so? I think you're speaking as an athlete, are you? Speaking as a former athlete?
Yes, I'm a former Olympian. So no matter if you have the flag as a tennis player, you will have the flag.
What about Lee's argument, and he's obviously not a former Olympian, at least not as far as I'm aware, that there is a difference, that Wimbledon is more of an individualistic pursuit than a national one, and therefore you as an Olympian were always carrying the flag, whether physically or not, but a tennis player in a Grand Slam tournament is not.
No, they are. I mean, it would be the same as a badminton player, even when you go as your own because you're professional, you still have a connection with the badminton federation, the tennis federation, the Olympian. I mean, it's only like 3 weeks, then the same athletes would go and they would play tennis in the Olympics in Paris.
Yes.
So I think people can compare, and everybody will know who is Russian players on the tour.
Yeah, I mean, you put it very well, and you've got a heck of a lot more experience than probably most people listening have of international sport. Well, just finally, if you would, Lisbeth, just a thought on the fairness of it from the player's point of view, and it might not matter. I mean, so how fair was it that South African sports people had to essentially not emigrate, did they? They had to sort of change nationality in order to compete on the world stage, regardless of what they may have privately or publicly thought and said about apartheid. Is it you don't go into badminton playing in order to be held responsible for matters of international diplomacy, and yet by excluding you are being held responsible in a way, I think.
Yes, of course it's not fair, but it's not fair that someone is being attacked either. And for the Ukraine players to play a Russian player, it's I mean, just to do that must be the worst thing you can imagine.
Can I ask you a silly question?
Yeah.
How good were you?
I was a world-class top player.
Oh, there you go. I love it. Thank you. And therefore a very helpful insight for us, Lisbeth. Thank you. Oh, it's a tough one. Val's in Hove. Val, what do you think?
Hi, James.
Hello, Val. In what capacity did you play at the Olympics?
Well, I wish.
What? I thought we were only going to confine calls to actual Olympians for the rest of this hour. I thought that Lisbeth had set the bar there, but never. It's you and me both, Val. You and me both.
Yeah, sorry.
Go on.
Sorry to disappoint. Somehow, even though I've been listening to you for yonks, I thought this topic would be the one I'd phone in and actually speak to you about.
Thank you.
I'm 3/4 Russian and 1/4 Ukrainian. Val is not my actual name because I have to be very mindful about the attention I draw to people who are related to me or my friends who are still living in Russia, so that side of the family. I think your previous caller, but one, had the right idea. Yes, it's supremely unfair for athletes who are competing for their own to beat goals that they set for themselves because that's life that they chose. Yes, it is unfair, but I think it would be not unfair to ask them to sign some sort of affidavit or whatever you want to call it before they're allowed to participate in international competitions, that they denounce the war crimes that are being committed by the country where they come from. I don't think it's too much of a
and then that would then become the requirement. Yes,
yep.
and the failure to do so would in many ways speak volumes, or the refusal to do so would speak volumes.
It's extremely disappointing that, there are no words. I mean, that's putting it very, very mildly, that Wimbledon have chosen to do this. I mean, it's monstrous to ask this tennis player from Ukraine to play an opponent from Russia whose views are at best unknown.
I think this is and I think, no, she's been quite generous to the Russian-born player because she defected she switched federations to Kazakhstan in 2018. So she says, as you do, she doesn't want to represent her original country, but the theoretical possibility still persists. If you allow Russian players to play under a neutral flag, the risk of a Ukrainian player having to play against them, even on a day like yesterday, is very real. It's very real.
Yes, absolutely. And on the point of them defecting and representing another country, unfortunately, there are a lot of pro-Putin supporters, athletes, who do that, who either play for Kazakhstan or for Uzbekistan or for any of the Putin-friendly former republics.
So they're sort of trying to have their cake and eat it.
Yeah, exactly that. So had she played for, I don't know, Georgia, for example, or for, a more, I guess, pro-Western looking nation, that would hit very different. But the fact that it's Kazakhstan is for me very, very sus already, and it's beyond disappointing.
I hear you, and I particularly appreciate the call given the context that you shared with us at the very beginning. Thank you, Val. It's coming up to 12:30, just gone 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. So the Russian Football Union has been suspended from all UEFA and FIFA competitions since the invasion of Ukraine, although the national team is allowed to play non-competitive fixtures. That also Champions League, I suppose, for club teams as well, historically. So there's no consistency across the sporting landscape. Some people are telling me, reminding me that part of the reason why Wimbledon changed its opinion after 2022 is because of the International Tennis Federation, if I've got that nomenclature correct, essentially penalising Wimbledon for excluding Russian players. I don't know that might be an explanation, but it's not an excuse, is it? Because, that could be the moment where you have to show resolve. But I think it affected seedings and sort of international ratings. But if the football can do it, and the football has got all sorts of problems with sports washing and perceptions of inappropriate venues for tournaments, then should Wimbledon? It's a horrible. It's one of those stories, oddly, that you get drawn to because of the potential for conversation. But actually, the longer the conversation goes on, the sadder you feel about the very existence of the question in the first place. And I didn't know, for example, that the switching of federations to Kazakhstan by a Russian-born player isn't necessarily the evidence of disassociation from Putin's regime that I would previously have considered it to be. 12:35 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What do we think about this? Miguel says children in hospital are dying from Russian bombs, and yet we're discussing the rights of Russian players in a war scenario. And so many thousands of innocent people get killed. I don't understand why we feel so much trouble at the prospect of excluding Russian players. And I get kind of struggling to find anybody who doesn't think that Russian players should have been told not to come. Quite a few people asking questions about Israel and whether or not Israeli players should also be excluded from Wimbledon. The comparisons on atrocities and potential war crimes are pretty clear, although the British state doesn't hold Benjamin Netanyahu in anything like the same regard as it holds Vladimir Putin, and whether you approve or disapprove of that, it's a simple statement of fact. And of course, there was no massive terror attack by anybody associated with Ukraine, whether Ukrainian rebels, troops, separatists or terrorists on Russian soil to prompt Putin's actions against Ukraine. So I understand why you want to hear parallels. We had a big conversation about whether or not Israel should be excluded from the Eurovision Song Contest of not that long ago. I understand why you see parallels and echoes, but I don't think they're quite as clear as you might think they are, not least because of the October the 7th, a terror attack on Israeli soil. And we'll have to wait for the International Criminal Court to hand down some of its judgments on these matters. And, of course, one of the first things Keir Starmer and David Lammy appear to have done since coming into power on Friday is to call off the previous government's attempts to delay that inquiry or inquiry, I think is the right word, into potential arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu on precisely the same grounds as Vladimir Putin would face potential arrest if he were to arrive on these shores. So there are parallels, and I appreciate that upsets some people, but I'm afraid that's not an opinion. That's just counting. 12:37 is the time. What do we think about the calls from the Ukrainian player Elina Svitolina for Russian players competing under a neutral flag to be banned from Wimbledon? Dan's in Newham. Dan, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. So I agree with you about... I rang in today to make the point about double standards, and I think we should apply things equally. So I think
it's hard, because you can't really take two conflicts in the world and see them as morally identical, or certainly not logistically identical. But carry on. That might just be my quibble.
No, we've seen the Lancet made a report saying they reckon about 7% of the Israeli Palestinian population. Say again, sorry?
They didn't. That was a letter in the Lancet, which unfortunately has been picked up and promoted on social media in a way that suggests it was actually peer-reviewed research when it was nothing of the sort. And it's really unhelpful that you don't tell the producer that you're going to come on and say that, because it's fake news. And now hopefully you're embarrassed.
No, I'm not. I think we apply double standards as a nation.
Yeah, but the example you've just come up with is fake news.
Okay, either way, if the Lancet report is not correct...
It's not a Lancet report. It's a non-peer-reviewed letter in the Lancet.
Okay, either way...
It's not either way, Dan. It's not. It can't be either way, can it? Because either way is, if the thing I've just said is true, and if the thing I've just said is false, it doesn't matter. Of course it matters.
So the point I'm making, there's no doubt the Israeli government has intentionally killed Palestinian
and there's no
children.
doubt that there was a terror attack on Israel on October the 7th that killed Israeli
you're making
people.
a justification.
No, I'm pointing out to you that it's different from what's going on in Ukraine.
Morally, it's not different, okay? The Israeli state are... Sorry?
To you, morally, it's not different. You don't think there was any right to retaliate after the October the 7th terror attack. To me, the scale of the retaliation is unconscionable and unforgivable. But to claim that the two events are the same is, with respect, just ignorant.
No, I'm afraid you seem to...
The first thing you've done is come on with some nonsense from social media that you've swallowed without doing the most basic of research.
Sorry, the Lancet is not social media. It's the most respected.
No, the claims that it is an article, the claims that it is a peer-reviewed article in the Lancet are on social media.
So James,
Israel was invaded. Israel was invaded by Hamas terrorists before.
Israel is occupying Palestine. Do you not understand that?
Yes, I understand everything, Dan, including the fact that you've come on national radio and completely made a fool of yourself.
I think, to be honest, I think you're showing your true colours, to be honest, mate.
Yeah, of course you do, Dan.
Yeah.
Back to the Lancet, eh? Next time, check whether it's on the letters page or whether it's in the peer-reviewed section of the magazine. Shall I tell you how you do that?
You know what, James?
No, Dan, this is important advice for you. Shall I tell you how you can tell whether it's on the letters page or in the peer-reviewed section of the magazine?
Children are being killed.
Open the magazine. Read the thing. Read the thing before you reference it. 20 minutes to 1. Julia's in Suffolk. Julia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yes, I really do want to say that it is only right it should ban Russian players purely because, as I said to your producer, it's not because it's going to change the course of war. It's not because it's going to change, Putin's mind, but it is to send a clear message to Ukrainian people that West hasn't forgotten this war, because it does feel like everybody kind of moving on with everything else, with obviously politics, elections, UK elections, French elections, US elections. And it's only those kind of atrocities that somehow refocus or bring the focus back on what is ongoing struggle. And by banning the Russian athletes, it would kind of somehow give a boost of morale to the Ukrainians, letting them know that actually.
So it becomes more about positivity from the Ukrainian perspective, more than punishment from the Russian perspective. There's sort of a message of solidarity that is, as you suggest, lacking lately in some elements of this dispute. Let me read you something though and see whether you agree with it. And I suppose elements of the last call will be relevant to this question as well. If they're not playing, this is from No Hostages. If they're not playing under a Russian flag, because they're playing under a neutral flag or an Israeli flag or any flag, etc., then is a similar message not sent? As in the fact that they're not allowed to play under the flag of their nation sends a similar message of solidarity to Ukraine in a way that doesn't demand players be banned on the basis of nationality alone.
Oh, absolutely not. I can tell you, as a former professional athlete and as a former team member of many people who defected to other countries just because it was more convenient for them, for political reasons, for the prospect reasons, for all kind of reasons.
Wow, I didn't see this coming. I didn't see this coming in the conversation, Julia.
Yes, I can assure you, as I said, as a former professional athlete, that it is a common practice to just go and fish for the deeper waters where it is more prospects for you. Even though I can tell you, as a matter of quite proven fact, that sometimes players would switch to other countries because there's a lack of that particular a sport member to represent the country, and they have more chances to get into places like Olympics or.
No, I understand that then. But so what could a Russian-born athlete do?
To send a clear message that they're against Putin's invasion.
Yes.
Come and compete under Ukrainian flag. Crikey. Why do you have to go and compete under the Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan or Tajikistan or Belarusian flag if it's all the same, ideology? I mean, you are not actually doing anything other than favor to yourself by giving yourself more prospects of, oh, look at me, I wash my hands clean. I'm actually not competing for Russia. The only reason why you're not competing for Russia because you cannot compete under the Russian flag, but you can go and compete under the Kazakhstan flag and just carry on with the same with the same message and with the same support, which achieves absolutely nothing. It's just.
I hadn't thought that. I hadn't thought that, but now you mention it, it's obviously true. How much weight does this stuff carry among sports people? I mean, how
huge
is it?
Huge.
Is it in the forefront? Even
huge.
Yeah, go on, tell me more.
Absolutely. As I said, both Russians and Ukrainians use sport. I mean, sport has always been used as a political sort of glamour. To compete for your country, and it was always used as a back in 80s, when I was born, it was used for political, Communist Party propaganda. I mean, parents would be judged based on, are your children competing? Are the children competing for the good of the party? So it is huge, and it's only like in the UK we view it as sport is outside of politics. It is not. I can assure you, it is not outside of the politics.
I mean,
in Ukraine, in Russia, and Kazakhstan, and anywhere else.
I mean, it is naive to the point of almost willful ignorance, isn't it?
Absolutely.
To claim that you can separate the two.
Ignorance.
Think of the 36 Olympics.
Yes, and that is something that, Russian exploiting, because they think, West doesn't really care about, sport as much as we do, whereas for Russians, it's a huge blow when they are getting banned from the sport arenas. Like for them, it's a national pride, it's a national identity, it's a national message. And frankly, when Russian gymnasts were allowed to compete with a Z on the uniform, that is a disgrace. That is an absolute disgrace, and it's a lack of a political literacy and understanding what sport means on pedestal of Russian power, and anything other than that is just entertaining egos of those involved and really been just looking foolish, really, because as I said, it would not change the course of war. Nothing really,
but it matters.
Apart from weapons and blood, sweat, and tears, that would change the course of war. But in terms of the message of solidarity, it is a powerful message, and it is a greatest weapon without anyone being killed.
That's so powerful. Thank you, Julia. And I think probably distilled or focused many of our thoughts on some of the issues that we're in danger of overlooking. And that idea of, if you really want to prove your disapproval of what Russia is doing, then what better way than to play under a Ukrainian flag? Thank you. It's 12:47. Up next, Comedy Hour. Popular Conservatives have held their... You remember? They're like the Judean People's Front or the People's Front of Judea. The National Conservatives, the Popular Conservatives, the Spartans. Last time Henry Riley covered one of these events, I got him to go through the entire list of Tory factions. I don't know how many of them have survived the general election. There's only 2 people on the 1922 committee who retained their seats on Friday, but the Popcons have had their first public event since the Tory election defeat, and Henry Riley will be reporting from there after this. 10 to 1 is the time, and another, is it an experiment in the new order of things at the moment? There's things like the event that Henry Riley has been attending this morning used to provide us with a curious mixture of hilarity and concern. So lessons of Brexit, I suppose, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and even more pertinently, perhaps, Donald Trump in America, who is far from a busted flush, politically speaking, quite the opposite. That meant that the hilarity was always leavened with some fear or some profound concern. But now that the Tory party has been excised from government for, one has to imagine, at least 5 years, do the lunatic fringes, and my goodness me, there are many of them, do the lunatic fringes of the Tory party, or the Tory movement, the Conservative movement, do they land with you in the same way that they did when you were worried that somebody like Braverman might end up grabbing the steering wheel of the country, not the party, or at some point in the future? I don't know. I'd like to think that they would just be hilarious without being concerning. But maybe they won't even be interesting anymore. Maybe, why are we reporting on this stuff? They're just a bunch of bald men arguing over a comb. I do not know, but I'm not ready to deny you the pleasure of finding out what they've been up to just yet. LBC's reporter Henry Riley has been at the Popular Conservatism event this morning, which was held at the Emmanuel Centre in Westminster. I won't hijack you by demanding that you run me through all of the factions again. We've tried that before, Henry, and I don't think either of us could remember. But just to be clear, this has got nothing to do with the 5 families.
No, this is totally different, James. This is a slightly different organisation, but there were a few of the different factions at this faction, if that makes sense. So this was held at the Emmanuel Centre, as you say. It's ordinarily used as an evangelical church. Today, though, used by the Conservatives very much to preach to the choir. Now, PopCon launched back in February. It's holding a Beginning the Rebuild conference. Now, its director is Mark Littlewood. He runs proceedings. He used to be the head of the IEA, the Institute for Economic Affairs. He opened proceedings with Annunciata Rees-Mogg, who, as you can tell by the name, the sister of Sir Jacob, former MEP herself. And Mr. Littlewood said that today was to begin what could be a very long march to power, hence why they've launched the conference today. And his prognosis, James, and I'll read you verbatim, was that, quotes, "It was bad, very bad, but not quite as bad as it might have been. The Conservatives came a clear second. In other words, it's bad, it's very bad, but not Canada bad. There's a little bit of maple syrup." And he's referring to the demise of the Canadian Conservative Party in the 90s. He then introduced Dr. David Starkey. He was followed by Lord Hannan, the former MEP, who gave the first of, sadly, numerous Doctor Who references.
We've been around for 3.5 centuries, and we've survived that long because, like Doctor Who, we can endlessly regenerate according to the needs of that moment. There is no reason why we shouldn't regenerate now, provided that, unlike Doctor Who, we don't go woke and forget what made us popular in the first place. And that, it seems to me, is our task, and that is why we are all gathered here today.
There were then other references to the BBC series Doctor Who with extermination and all kinds of things referenced. Suella Braverman was the keynote speaker. She isn't actually here. She's been in Washington at the National Conservatism Conference out there, but she was beamed on the big screen, Big Brother style, and offered an olive branch to Reform UK.
Historically, in British politics, we have had the monopoly on the right-wing vote. That's one of the reasons why we've been so successful politically. The left, by contrast, for the last 100 years, has been split. Left-wing voters have had a choice of party to go for. And we, by contrast, have had the luxury of a monopoly, but no longer. And that is why the Reform Party presents an existential threat to us electorally.
And that sentiment was shared by Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, who, of course, last week roundly beaten in his constituency of North East Somerset, lost to Labour's Dan Norris by more than 5,000 votes. He again reiterated that demand to do a deal, or to at least not presume that Reform UK voters will automatically come back to the Tories.
And even for our failings, even for the inability to deliver what we believed in, 7 million people still voted Conservative, and the broader Conservative family won 11 million votes. So that's not too bad. And yes, I include Reform as the broader Conservative family. And sometimes families have their differences. But we need to reunite that Tory family and recognise that conservatism is more popular than the Conservative and Unionist Party.
Now, James, I was at the launch of this back in February. It was really well attended. There was a sort of small room which was bustling. You couldn't get a place. It was standing room only. They decided today to book a bigger room, which may have been a mistake, actually, because the second half of the room was virtually empty. There were quite a lot of journalists there as well. I only counted 2
Did they outnumber?
MPs.
Did the journalists outnumber the attendees?
Not quite,
Okay.
but I wouldn't bet my house on it. But there were 2 MPs there, Wendy Morton, who was Liz Truss's chief whip, and Sir Christopher Chope, who's the long-standing MP for Christchurch. Lastly, James, I think that the main sort of thrust I got from this was that CCHQ is corrupt. That was a word used by one of the speakers, David Campbell Bannerman. They're urging...
He was a Conservative MEP at one point, I think.
Yes, who was actually, previous to that, the deputy leader of UKIP. They've urged the party not to rush the leadership election. And the main sort of point from Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg is, look who the MPs gave us and look who the members gave us. We need the members to decide the leader. Of course, that's a reference to Liz Truss being selected by the members.
Is Jacob Rees-Mogg technically unemployed?
I believe it, certainly in terms of politics, yes.
Because he was compelled to step. Well, not even in terms of politics. He was compelled to step down from his company, wasn't he? As a prerequisite of being a politician. And the good people of Somerset have spoken on the subject of him having a future as a politician. So I can't imagine he's signing on, Henry. But he is obviously he's got an awful lot of time on his hands to turn up at events like this with David Campbell Bannerman and Dan Hannan.
Well, yeah, and arranged by his sister, Annunciata Rees-Mogg, who is the director of communications for PopCon. But yes, Jacob Rees-Mogg also hinting that the end may not be nigh for his political career and that we may not have seen the last of him.
What might he do? I mean, you made me think of Nosferatu rising from the crypt at this point.
I think he may well give it another go, standing for Parliament, because I presume...
What, 5 years from now? 5 years from now?
Yes.
Right,
I don't
okay.
imagine he'll be considered for a lordship, but yes, he says articles of his demise are overstated.
Yeah, well, thank you. So what do you think is going to happen? Briefly, I know you can't editorialise, but do you think you'll be attending another one of these meetings? And if you do, will it be in a phone box?
Well, I hope so. They're jolly good fun. So when the invitation comes, I'll absolutely be here.
Henry Riley for you, live from the Emmanuel Centre, where Popular Conservatism have held an event. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 It's time for Sheila Fogarty.